Welcome to CandleLight Audiobook. Chapter 181. Someone burst into tears as soon as Fry finished speaking. It was Median. She burst into tears as if she could not believe that she had become a criminal. Your Honor. Is that really true? She might even buy a witness. Lyra's voice, pretending to be sick, filled the courtroom. It was she herself who had recruited the witness. We've done the research so strictly that anyone can be convinced of it. If you want to check, you can make a request later. That's all the court's punishment is, but the three of you will have to undergo a separate investigation into the hallucinogen test later. It was only then that Wendy, who realized how ridiculous the case she had been involved in, began to cry. It was only now that she realized how unjust it was to take the false charge. Only after being dismissed did she know that it was punishment. What a foolish woman she is. If it's a punishment for hallucinogens, I'm going to tell them. As if he had waited for Celine's question, Asher replied with a smile. They must have never dreamed that the job, which had been deliberately left to the Crown Prince by the aristocratic party due to the difficulty of tracing and investigating, would seize their ankles. It would not end easily if Asher would deal with it. Finally, the charges against Rose sent Lyra. And the sentence that she had waited for began. Lyra stared at Fry with a very nervous face. Her pale look was so serious that she could collapse immediately. For you, I heard that you were there alone when the Count fell down the stairs, and a witness saw the golden-haired lady there. Frey's eyes were sharpened after a short pause. So Lyra swallowed her breath, and Celine took the hand of Asher. She hoped Lyra would be punished severely. I've confirmed that you're a real criminal who tried to kill Count Rosent and sentence you to 20 years in prison. 20 years in prison? It was heavy for the punishment inflicted on the aristocratic lady. So Lyra, who was trembling so badly as Frey's words fell, jumped out of her seat. Then she tried to rush straight at Fry, but the attempt was stopped by guards waiting around. No. It's not me. That's what she did. Don't be ridiculous. More than a dozen guards surrounded Lyra's perimeter and blocked her from moving anywhere, whether Fry had ordered in advance before sentencing. Your Honor. I have something to tell you. The county family retreats this accusation. Darian, who had been bewildered by the more severe ruling than expected, came out late, but Fry shook her head. The execution of the sentence starts today. If you have any objections, I hope you'll do it later, and this is the end of the trial. There was no mercy behind it when she turned coldly. The news of Lyra's murder of her father quickly spread throughout the empire. Are you really going to go back to the mansion? Yes, it's my home now. Celine nodded to Asher's worried question. Although Lyra was punished, he seemed worried because Darian was still in the mansion. It was because Darian had chased after Lyra, who had been dragged out and had stared at Celine and Asher several times. The look was as full of murderous spirit as Lyra. Asher did not release Celine's hand and persuaded her again. Why don't you go to my villa? There's another one in the capital city as well as one in the woods. If that's inconvenient for you, I'll find a place for you. It wasn't that his worries didn't make sense. She had already been framed by Lyra, so she didn't know what danger would befall on her. It might be a good choice to leave the mansion, as Asher said. No. My mother is still in the mansion, and I'm sure the employees in the mansion are worried. Celine smiled bitterly and made an excuse that the Countess remained in the mansion. He could not answer though he tried to say something. I'm sorry to bother you, but the truth is that I didn't finish Lyra perfectly yet, so I need to stick to the mansion. That way, I can get her information faster, and how to punish her. 20 years in prison. It was a severe punishment for the noble lady, who was underage. It was clear that the sentence was set on the premise of an appeal. In addition, at the end of the trial, Darian had said he would cancel the charges. So no matter what he would do, he must do anything to get Lyra out. It wasn't that difficult for the nobles. And another problem was that it was not so easy for a minor, aristocratic youngster to leave home without reason. Maybe he reminded himself of a lot of problems, but he said in a very sad tone, I hope you will become an adult soon. It was not like other good things would happen when she grew up. Though she had realized much from the past experience, she could see what he wanted from the warmth that held her hands together. He seemed to want to be with Celine as soon as possible. Then I will be able to protect you, by keeping you beside me. I can boast of being my own person. Isn't that what you're doing now? Today he had been stirring the capital with a splendid carriage. Asher laughed a little at her. It's hard to deny. But I hope there will be a place where I can officially be with you, so you don't have to act weird. Celine, who recalled her touch in front of everyone today, lost her speech with her eyes wide open. A little shame came in. Why do you bring up those words again and embarrass me? If she had been questioned by someone other than Asher, she would have been able to deal with it flexibly. However, she couldn't do that because her opponent was Asher, as usual. So Celine said curtly, I won't do it again. No, you can do it, but I hope you do that when there's no one. I won't. Please. No, I won't even talk anymore. I'm sorry. It's okay when there's a person, so do as you like. Eventually, Celine, relieved by his tender smile and apology, smiled after him. It was also a smile that melted away the joy of having achieved what she had long hoped for. You cannot cancel it because the trial has already been terminated. Then I'll appeal. I'll give you bail, so please release Lyra. Darian, who had never expected such a big punishment, replied with embarrassment. How dare the court refuses so harshly? If it were the Count who had the broad personal network, it would have been easier to deal with things, but this time the Count was a victim, and Darian was just a naive nobleman who has just graduated from the academy. Of course, it could be solved easily, but Fry was standing in the way. Besides, the Crown Prince's breath was in it. Darian gritted his teeth and asked for an interview. Lyra has never been in a place like this before, so I think I should check it out. She's still young. I see. You'll have to fill out the paperwork, so you can come with me. Darian was not able to meet Lyra until he had completed a fairly complicated document. It was a humble place compared to the mansion, but it was a prison for the nobility, so there was no strange thing to find fault except that it was a little narrow. Brother. Lyra. Darian came close to Lyra, who greeted him with tears. His eyes were swollen as if to cry all the time after the trial. So Darian hurriedly handed over the handkerchief to Lyra. Well, what am I supposed to do now? I'll get you out, so don't worry. Sob sob. In Darian's answer to get her out, Lyra began to cry aloud. As he saw that she couldn't give a proper answer and just squeeze out tears, she seemed to be in a very unstable state of mind. The guard glanced inside as he had heard that she might have taken a hallucinogen. Lyra, who had found some stability in Darian's comfort, began to curse Celine again. My life is, because of that vulgar woman. I'm scared of what everyone will think of me in the future. Sob sob, how did I keep the image? What would Oscar think? What am I going to do if the engagement is broken? Lyra cursed Celine, listing each of the things she had lost. It was a way of saying that all these things had come from Celine. She passed all the blame on to Celine. Chapter 182. In addition, she was definitely in the mansion. But how did she get to the next city? You've seen her, too. Yes, I saw her. As usual, he had arrived at the mansion and checked Celine's room. Apparently, the lights had been on in Celine's room, and he remembered seeing her silhouette as well. He also believed she hadn't really sneaked out because he'd always been watching her. So he had trusted Lyra's words that she had been with Celine at the moment the Count had fallen. Because Lyra had been on the same side, he had believed that she couldn't lie. If Celine hadn't really been in the mansion and Lyra had been doing a one-man show alone, she would not have asked for help purely from him. She had been doing that all the time. So I didn't have the slightest doubt about what Lyra said, and I didn't take any action. He hadn't doubted that Lyra would do well on her own. She had always been praised for her shrewdness. Although he had not spent much time with her as he had entered the academy, Lyra had always been a child who had been praised by someone. Of course, he had just watched with folded arms, because the Crown Prince had stepped forward. It had been possible that if he had made a rash move, he would have taken the false charge. He had also expected that the Crown Prince and Celine would make some evidence because they said they had been to a faraway country. When he saw Lyra's face, he thought it was a good thing to stand by with folded arms. In the first place, all he had wanted to gain from this was the real power of the mansion. Darian had intended to save Celine, who would be in a corner as a criminal, and to give a favorable impression, but it was only supplementary, and not for the original purpose. Lyra had a glimmer of hope as he said that he had seen her, and asked with her sparkling eyes. Why don't you tell the judge you've seen her now? Lyra. As I told you, it's dangerous to testify that you and I saw her, at the same time. The judge will be asking why we were all there in front of Celine's room in the first place. You can say it was a family meeting. Why was the family meeting in front of Celine's room? Besides, it's weird to say that we had a family meeting we'd never had before. It'll also be complicated to explain why our stepmother wasn't there. When he repeated the answer to Lyra, who was trying to persuade him again, she burst into tears again. I'll examine the evidence again. I'll apply for an appeal and bail, so don't worry, just wait a minute. I get it, brother. And I have one more favor to ask of you. I hope Miss Isis will come to see me. I have something to tell her. I see. I'll deliver it. Darian, who left the prison, looked straight at the evidence submitted by Celine. In addition to the court-appointed nobility, 2 guards followed him. Unfortunately, however, there was no weird thing in it. If they had produced evidence from only one place, he could do something, but they would have submitted certificates of passage through several cities and finally from the Kingdom of Croa. A certificate of passage from another country. They couldn't even try to fake it. Moreover, it was marked as a time when one would not arrive unless one moved very tightly. There would be enough time if the Crown Prince moved alone, but there was no extra time to move with Celine, who wasn't used to long-distance travel. I can't argue. With this perfect evidence, there was no manipulation. No, it was a thoroughly planned evidence that could not be refuted. They said it was a vacation, but they didn't spend so much time in the city. Darian, who had been checking them for a long time, covered the files that had sorted out the evidence. Have you finished it? If you have any questions, would you like me to explain? No, thank you. I'll apply for an appeal and bail first. I see. It'll take a while because it has to go through the judge. Come with me. The application was filled out and bailed out according to the instructions, but the only answer returned from Fry was no. The answer returned within a day, as if there was no room for review. Her age is still young, but she did the heavy crime and there is the risk of a second offense, and I reject your application for bail. I'll reschedule and inform you about the appeal at a later date. Darian, who read it, crumpled the document and threw it to the floor. I can't believe the judge rejected the bail. It is the nobility of the empire to free a man on bail, even if he kills a person. It was clear that the Crown Prince had done something. To make matters worse, even Isis expressed her intention not to meet Lyra. The day to go to the Kingdom of Croa was a short time away, and she said she was busy, but she no longer seemed to want to continue her relationship with Lyra and the family of Count Vermont. If my father was fine. If his father had been fine, he would have persuaded the Duke to bring Lyra out somehow. However, the Count was in a coma by the hands of Lyra, and other nobles, who had thought it was a disgraceful crime, turned completely away from their eyes. It was disgraceful of him to realize that the great power his father had, only after he had driven his father to hell. Even though he had obtained the power, he had failed to use it properly. Celine always ignores me. Somehow the servants and maids of the mansion took care of Celine, like a glass that was fragile. She had acted as if she had been the power of the county family. It was too late, but Celine, not Lyra, should have been the culprit. But he could no longer put the false accusation on her, as she had completely prepared and refuted. On the contrary, she earned the name, poor lady, and gained the sympathy and love of all people as if she was revered. Though of humble origin, there was even a great deal of public opinion that her character and wisdom were perfect for the Crown Prince's spouse. Even among the aristocratic party, no one dared to refute it. Unable to tell Lyra about it, he was seething angrily in bed, when a woman's screams were heard in the Count's room. Call the family doctor. Call the family doctor. Hurry. It was the Countess. She was screaming with a very surprised face. If she was making a fuss like that, the Count was either dead or awake. Don't tell me. I haven't achieved anything yet. With the fear of assisting and inciting the immoral thing and the thought of having to pay for it, he could not stop his whole body to tremble. Nevertheless, he had to confirm what had happened in the Count's room, so he fearfully opened the door. Darian opened his eyes wide. He had heard that there was a greater chance that his father would not wake up, but the Count, who seemed unable to regain consciousness throughout his life, was staring at the door with his eyes wide open. Darian's whole body trembled as if he were going to rush in and tear it apart for his immoral crime. But the Count didn't say anything but just stared silently at Darian. Darian, who had been terrified of the Count for so long, approached him slowly, without any movement. Darian called the Count in a trembling voice. Father. However, the Count still had no answer. There was no movement either, except just staring at Darian with all his strength, even though it looked very unnatural. Maybe. As if he realized something, Darian asked, "Can't you speak?" Blink. The Count closed his eyes once and then opened to Darian's question. It seemed to be a sign of affirmation. When asked, "Can't you move your body?" this time, the Count closed his eyes once again and opened. Unfortunately, keeping his eyes open seemed to be the limit. Darian swallowed a sigh of relief at the sight. "Well, I'm glad you woke up like this. Are you sick anywhere?" Even when asked awkwardly, the Count blinked once and sent a sign that he was okay. Fortunately, he didn't seem to have any regrets about Darian. Because he just woke up after a very long time and opened his eyes, he seemed to feel uncomfortable. Chapter 183. Darian asked the Count carefully. "Do you remember what happened? Do you remember the accident?" When he carefully mentioned the accident, the Count, whose eyes were shaking for a moment, slowly closed his eyes and then opened it again. Darian swallowed his saliva. I wish he wouldn't remember. How can he remember this incident? Do you remember the criminal? The Count's eyes blinked once. Was it Celine? Unlike earlier, the Count blinked twice. That meant. Then, it was Lyra, as expected. The Count, who did not answer Darian's question for a moment, closed his eyes. It seemed like a memory he didn't even want to remember. Fortunately, he did not seem to know he was an accomplice to Lyra, seeing that he didn't show hostility or showed no signs of surprise. The Count had closed his eyes, but just in case, Darian covered his mouth, which went up by itself, in his belief that God must be helping them. I'm so lucky, and if he can't talk like that and he can't move his body, he's just a scarecrow. His father couldn't do anything with that body, so he would automatically be the Count. It was much better to be a scarecrow who woke up like this and couldn't do anything at all than to be so anxious about when the Count would wake up. Please lie down for a moment. The family doctor will be here soon. The frivolous Countess screamed, so one of the servants went to look for him. Would you like some water? The Count blinked and Darian was about to go out of the room to get some water, but a servant was already standing by the door. He was at a loss whether he had seen Darian go inside earlier. Water. Yes? Yes. At Darian's short instruction, the servant hurried to bring the water, and the Count drank the cold water. After a while, the agitated Countess came into the room. She held the hands of the Count, checking Darian, and the panting family doctor also rushed in. How's my father's condition? Darian asked, and the Countess's cold eyes followed. After the doctor examined the Count with enthusiasm, he looked incredulous. It's hard to believe, but he won't be in a coma anymore. My God, the Countess wept and kissed the Count's hand. Darian didn't know what she really felt, but she looked like she was giving thanks to God. Darian, who had managed to stop himself from furrowing his forehead at his doctor's hopeful remarks, asked him what he was curious about. Well, when will his body be able to move? His body has no response yet, so I can't guarantee anything. What about speaking? He can't even turn his head. What's going on with that? I can't guarantee that either. Then, Could he become unable to speak or move for the rest of his life? He just woke up, but it was the worst. It might have been better if didn't open his eyes. Oh, my God, honey. What can I do? After hearing what the doctor had said, the Countess buried her face next to the Count with a cry that sounded like the world had collapsed. Darian also tried to look frustrated with his mouth covered and pretended to join in the grief. Actually, he was happier than anyone else. So the Count's room was filled with the Countess's mournful voice for some time. What's going on, everyone? And in a moment, Celine, who returned from a belated outing to meet the businessmen, visited the Count's room, where people huddled together. The servants and maids were filling the hall in front of the Count's room for some news. Since that incident, the Count's room had been frequented by servants only when they had a job to do, so why were there so many people today? Wondering, Celine approached them. Miss. Please go inside quickly. The servants and maids, who recognized her even before she reached the Count's room, urged her to hurry inside. They all had urgent faces. This made her wonder if the Count was dead. As she hurried into the Count's room, she saw the Count, who was looking at her. Father? She rushed to the side of the Count, who had awakened. She thought the Count was already dead rather than awake. Oh my God. When did he wake up? The doctor began to explain to Celine, who asked him, that even the Count was in bad shape. The expression of Celine, who was hearing his explanation, gradually darkened. He was like a dead man just with his eyes open. What was the difference from not waking up in this way? I think the damage to his spine while he fell has had a big impact. I can't believe he has to live like this for the rest of his life. As she glanced at Darian, who stood next to her at the terrible news, he was frowning with his palm covering his mouth. Don't tell me your hidden face is smiling. With a plausible assumption, Celine asked the doctor. What should I do to make my father feel better again? Yeah. What should I do to make him move a little bit? We have to do something. At Celine's question, the doctor felt embarrassed. He had no answers, but she could feel keenly that there was no way to do it. The Countess squeezed out her crying voice and said, there must be a way. When he woke up earlier, he moved his fingers a little. The doctor opened his eyes wide and asked again if that was true. Would I really lie in front of my sick husband? Well, it's not like that. If that's true, it means there's plenty of room for recovery. It's possible that he'll be able to recover as much as he can, depending on his efforts. The doctor's face brightened up. The Countess and Celine also had a big smile. While such a fake family smiled for the Count, the real son, Darian, stuck to his serious face alone. Celine pointed this out without missing it. Are you not happy with that? He's awake, and the doctor says there's a chance for father to recover. That's not it. It's just because I can't believe it. Celine laughed at Darian's late reply. He was shameless, as he had plotted to kill his own father by joining his sister. So do you? I'm sure that if our father recovers, the county family will be able to get back to its original form, and the work of Lyra, who is insisting on repeatedly being unjust, will be solved, right? I don't think Lyra pushed him either. She mentioned Darian, who had been involved in it. When Celine put Lyra's name in her mouth, a wave rose in the eyes of the Count, who had been lying motionless, and his fingers moved a little. Well, they are really moving. The doctor, who was examining the Count's condition again, saw that and was excited to explain the treatment to help the Count recover. For now, you can start by massaging his body. He'll surely be able to walk again in no time if you consistently do that. You can leave the massaging to the servants if you want. Against the backdrop of the doctor's voice that resonated throughout the room, Darian, with a very small voice, continued what he was saying earlier. Oh, no, no. That can't be true. I'm very happy, but I'm just a little surprised. Are you? My brother thinks about my father very much. I want him to recover soon, so you can tell him who the real culprit is. Along with the smiling Celine, Darian raised his mouth awkwardly. It looked as if he were crying, and Celine's smile became even stronger. Celine and the Countess, who left behind the servants who massaged the Count's entire body as advised by the doctor, took a short rest in the garden. In front of the Countess had wept and rejoiced, but the face of the Countess, who was drinking tea, was full of relief. "I'm glad my father woke up." "Yes." There was little joy in the face of the Countess, who answered Celine's words. Rather, she looked a little tired from her exaggerated performance. When Celine realized this, she made the maids leave and asked her what she really wanted. "You don't look very happy, do you?" "That's the same for you." "What do you want to ask?" The Count was an important figure who had changed the future of Celine and the Countess, but it was a natural result because he had always excessively defended his bloodline and treated her mother and her as just beautiful ornaments. Chapter 184. I wonder if there is anyone in this mansion who will truly treat him well. Besides, how would he feel if he finds out that he was betrayed by his own blood and was comforted by his so-called ornaments? Celine laughed, then said to the Countess, "I'm sorry, but I won't let Lyra be left untouched although my father woke up. I will also punish Darien even if the county family is doomed." "What are you sorry for?" "That's a very good judgment. You can't leave the snake strangling." "I'll help you, too." The Countess gritted her teeth as if she had reminded her of Celine, who had been falsely accused. She was terrified because she couldn't take a step out of the room. If Celine had no background, she would be afraid of the Count and his children even though she was the Countess, but Celine had already won numerous supporters and powers, and she even had the Crown Prince on her back. Therefore, it would be better to trample on them and get the virtue of a grown-up daughter and son-in-law rather than to curry favor with a man who treated her as an ornament. While Celine and the Countess were resting in the garden, Darien went into the Count's room alone. Darien told the servants, who were massaging the Count's body, to go outside. But the doctor. "I have something to talk to my father for a while, so do it again later." "Talk to the Count? Is he in a position to talk now?" The servants hesitated to go out, but they still did. He sat by the head of the Count, who was staring at him. "Father." When he called him, the Count blinked. There was no change in his face, but it was a reaction that seemed to be asking why. At Darien's casual appearance, Darien hesitated a little and then opened his mouth again. "Lyra, she's in jail now." Darien's words brought waves back into the Count's eyes. He had thought she might have been punished for pushing him down, but he didn't know she was in jail. He had just woken up and hadn't heard anything about Lyra. What Lyra had done was a terrible, immoral crime, but it was enough if he dismissed and covered it as an unfortunate incident in the family. But prison? Why? Who in the world accused her? Darien continued to speak as he saw the color of the Count's face becoming black. "She was, on the charge of trying to kill her father. She's been in trouble because I couldn't get the permission even if I applied for bail. I think it's because the Crown Prince is involved in the middle." The Count rolled his eyes when the Crown Prince's name suddenly appeared. It was shocking that Lyra was in prison, but it seemed to ask why even the name of the Crown Prince came out. Well, in fact, Celine was driven to the criminal at first. Then the Crown Prince stepped in. As he was unable to tell the whole truth, he said some parts, taking off their faults, and the Count closed his eyes. It was Lyra who had intentionally taken him to Celine's room, so he seemed to be making a rough guess. There was nothing to benefit from continuing this story, so Darien quickly changed the topic. "Anyhow, Lyra said she had made a mistake, and she's very worried about you. She cries every day and regrets her mistake. So, please help Lyra." Darien's words sank the Count's eyes low. Mistake? At that time, the face of Lyra, who had pushed him down the stairs, was as vivid as if it was painted. It was never the look of a person making a mistake. It was a clear intention. Still, Darien continued to stress that she had made a mistake until the Count's face was full of tiredness. "If you are in a state you can't answer, I must have been too talkative. I'm afraid you're tired today, so I'll leave now. Take a good rest." Darien, who was afraid that his mistake would be revealed if he defended Lyra any longer, went out of the Count's room at the right time. In the empty room, where Darien had left and no one was present, the Count, who had been staring at the ceiling for some time, soon closed his eyes. In his eyes, many of the karma he had done fell into tears. His own children that he thought were on his side were too heartless, but only his new wife and stepdaughter were sincere. Even his most loved Lyra tried to kill him. Darian had struggled to say that it had been a mistake, but the Count, who clearly remembered the look of Lyra while pushing him, felt keen that it was not a mistake. Tears didn't stop at the feeling of being denied everything that he had done so far. They were all his karma. It was a matter of his own accord. It was an irreversible past that he only realized now that he could no longer lift a finger. While looking back at his life and shedding tears of regret and resentment, the Countess, who had been away for a while drinking tea with Celine, entered the room. As if she had had no leisurely face, the Countess hurried up to the Count, making a very worried face. "Where are the servants? Why are you alone? Are you feeling better? Would you like some water? No, do you want me to massage you? Oh, my God, look at these tears, are you hurt somewhere?" When she saw the Count's terrible state, the Countess was worried about him, and the Count's tears that he was holding back burst out again. Though she was a woman of humble origin, she must have been a warmer woman than anyone else. Nevertheless, resentment and bitterness were in his heart at what he couldn't express anymore. If she knew this or not, the Countess smiled brightly and held his hands. "Now that you've got your doctor's words and you're awake, you'll get better soon. I'll do my best to help." As if he had found a ray of hope in the face of the talking Countess, the Count glistened his eyes. With the dedication of the Countess, the proper prescription of his physician and the constant efforts of everyone in the mansion, the Count was soon able to get his energy back. As his doctor said, his lower body showed no signs of improvement, but it was possible for him to move his arms or hands a little bit. Of course, he couldn't pick things up or turn around unless he had someone to help him. "Would you like some water?" "Yes." He could also speak briefly. She didn't know if it was because he was not feeling well yet or because he didn't want to talk, but he often answered the Countess's questions. "By the way, today is Lyra's trial day. Shall we go there for a while?" "No." Despite Darian's relentless efforts, the Count offered no help for Lyra. Despite Darian's efforts to bring news of the poor Lyra often. Of course, it was the Countess's effort. She helped him to stand firm as he had been shaken his heart. "You'd better take good care of Lyra." Celine said it was okay, but I think the good child should be given a chance to repent. The Count shook his head faintly. Even though it was a small move that wouldn't be noticeable if she didn't look closely, the Countess nodded her head as if she knew it. "She's a good kid, so she'll soon understand what you mean." The Countess massaged his hand to justify the Count's coldness of abandoning her own daughter. There was not a shadow in her smiley face. "Come to think of it, the doctor strongly advised me that you should take a rest and recover in a resort. Why don't you buy a villa at this time? A villa where you can get a good rest. I'll check it out and buy it without bothering you." "Okay." No matter how much the Count's condition improved, he would not be able to live and work normally. Therefore, it was clear that the county family would fall into Darian's hands as it was. So why not take away even the property in return for humiliation and persecution? The Countess, who had a chance to take the property from the Count, smiled brightly at him, who believed in her and answered yes. "Considering the Count's awakening, I'm sentencing Vermont Lyra to 5 years of house arrest." At Frey's sentence, Lyra collapsed again to the floor. "House arrest? Why should I be punished when my father is not dead? And why didn't my father request for a plea for mercy?" Chapter 185. "Lyra, you can stay in the mansion and persuade your father. I'm sure he'll forgive you soon if you show remorse. You'd better see your father as soon as you get to the mansion." Darian whispered quietly to Lyra. For the nobles, house arrest was not a bad ruling. In any case, the detention in the house was not only allowed outside the mansion, but it was possible to stay free inside. She could invite guests to have tea time in the garden. It meant that she could not just go out, but she was free inside. Besides, didn't the sentence decrease from 20 to 5 years? It was clear that if he applied for bail consistently, she would be released before serving her sentence. Before that, the Count might have forgiven her. At Darian's words, Lyra nodded reassuringly. I understand. By the way, did Miss Julia send me a reply? What did she say? That's... As Darian hesitated to answer, Lyra realized that Julia had rejected her. Fry added an exception, without giving her to be caught in the shock that followed. However, since you have to stay in the mansion with 2 victims, detention is limited to the room used by Lady Lyra until now. What do you mean? It means that you can't come out of your room. In addition, a request has been made from the Imperial family. You have not been questioned about the hallucinogen yet, so you need special care. What's this? That's a crazily unfair sentence. With all the servants and guests of the mansion watching, am I supposed to be questioned about the hallucinogen I didn't take? Should I get stuck in the room and hear that wicked woman laughing? Do I have to watch the guards and the investigators go in and out of the room, and see the servants look askance at me? Lyra fell flat on the floor because of the unprecedented ruling. She got dizzy. Unconsciously, her tears drenched the floor. She would rather die than suffer such shame and humiliation. Even though she had done everything by herself, she felt unjust and unfair because the cause was Arya. I'll never let her go. As soon as the sentence fell, Lyra was soon able to move on. When they saw an old carriage, surrounded by 6 guards, headed for the mansion of Count Vermont, each of them was talking, imagining a figure in the wagon. She said she was going to appeal, but it must have been decided by house arrest. My God! How can a victim and an offender stay in one place? My acquaintance worked at the court, and she said that she will be detained in her room and not the typical house arrest. In her room? That's a terrible punishment as well. I heard there's a charge about hallucinogen, and they're going to investigate it in the mansion. That's why they will lock her in her room. Oh, my God. That's the worst. I can't believe that graceful lady would do such a thing. I feel like I've been cheated. The rumors were all the opposite. The rumors of a saint and a wicked woman. There have been rumors that it's been a little strange, but this case has definitely turned out to be true. The wicked woman was Lady Lyra, and she had overlaid all her sins against the benevolent Arya. It's a common story in novels, isn't it? The wagon was old and Lyra could hear all their gossip. Her fists trembled as she wanted to tear up their mouths, which made rumors. Her slightly grown nails dug into the palms of her hands and tore her flesh. How dare! However, after arriving at the mansion, Lyra's condition did not improve. Please, please let me see my father. She cried and wanted to ask for forgiveness from the Count because this was her only chance. However, she only heard the Countess's cold answer. Unfortunately, he doesn't want to see you. What? I want to hear that directly from my father. Arya suddenly appeared and shrugged her body before Lyra, who was about to rush to the Countess. Oh, my God, I'm scared. Mom, stay away. You. How dare you? As Lyra screamed at the gaze of Arya, who looked at her as if she was a bug, the guards, who had arrived at the mansion with the carriage, hurried to shut Lyra's mouth and overpowered her. The hallucinogen is really scary. It has made a person change that much. They have to start investigating and treating her as soon as possible. Isn't that right, brother? Of all occasions, Arya stood beside Darian and said so. Darian, who would save Lyra, closed his mouth and looked at the situation with his arms folded. He seemed quite embarrassed because Arya rarely clung to him. How can this happen? Blood was likely to pour out from her eyes filled with sorrow and anger. Lyra was caught in her room as if she had been dragged away, and she had to receive the cold eyes of the servants and maids. You'd better not think useless, lady, because the investigation is about to begin. With the cold voice of a guard, there was a chain-winding sound outside the closed door. Seeing no sound of distant footsteps, the guards, who had just warned, seemed to be guarding the room outside. Why? All this was to put the ugly girl back in her original place. In addition, it was to have what she originally had to have a little faster in return. But what is the situation like now? She lost everything and was stigmatized and was stuck in her room. Julia and Darian, who she had believed would help her, acted like they didn't know her. Trapped in a clean room, as if all the dangerous goods had been put away, she screamed for a while and squeezed out her tears. It was because there was no place to relieve her bitterness. After squeezing tears all day long until she was hoarse, Lyra suddenly opened her own secret space as if something had come up. Like Arya, she also had a secret space in her room for one person. There, Lyra, who took out a box, wiped away her tears from her eyes. The contents of this box were the only thing that could save her. Ms. Julia. The letter has arrived. Really? Who sent it? That's. The butler was speechless at Julia's question. Julia also sighed when she noticed that the uncomfortable opponent had sent the letter. Why does she keep bothering me when I had already thrown her away? Furthermore, rumors about Lyra were terrible. If she got involved with her for nothing, there would be useless rumors even to herself. It was not long before going to the kingdom of Croa, and she pretended not to know her as much as she could, but she had a headache as Lyra sent a letter every day. If she keeps sending these letters, why don't you just send her a reply? At the careful advice from the butler, Julia put down the document that she was reviewing. She thought it would be better to refuse at a single stroke than to continue this troublesome connection. Read it roughly and give me a summary. All right. So Julia, who ordered it, took the document back into her hands. It was the document sent from the kingdom of Croa, so she had to carefully examine it and proceed to strike the crown prince who had made herself, the duke, and the aristocratic party this way. After Julia squeezed her temples again, she picked up the document again and began to concentrate. She examined it carefully so that there were no omissions or mistakes. No matter how much he had the same purpose of attacking the empire, her opponent was the king of a country. However, the face of the butler, who opened the letter next to Julia and reviewed the contents, began to turn pale. Ms. Julia. I think you should see the letter for yourself. Julia furrowed her forehead and asked why. Because the man, who was always dignified and had the appearance of being a butler of the Duke family, stuttered. What's going on? What does it say? That's. Despite Julia's urging, the butler could not give a quick answer. Eventually, Julia, who could not overcome her frustration, took the letter from him and began to read for herself what had surprised the butler so much. Chapter 186. Ms. Julia. I understand you are going to abandon me. I admit that I made a big mistake, but don't forget that it wasn't my work alone, and I have letters exchanged with Ms. Julia. In the letters, there is also a story about that woman and His Highness the Crown Prince. It's also written what Ms. Julia will do in the future. If you ignore this letter again this time, you will have to be prepared for what I will say. Ha! How wicked she is. Julia crumpled the letter in her hands and threw it to the floor. She dares to threaten me? She wanted to go to the mansion of the Count of Vermont immediately and twist her neck, but she barely endured her desire and emptied the warm tea with her trembling hands. The butler had guessed her mind as he had read the letter in advance, and he hurriedly prepared the cold water. Julia, who emptied the cold water in a single gulp, burst into laughter as if she had been embarrassed. How will I kill her? Huh? Ms. Julia. The problem was that she had written everything in the letters without hesitation because she had thought she would never betray her. She would never have done such a thing if she had known Lyra was so stupid. Maybe it was because she had thought Celine was an easy target that she couldn't get rid of the evidence thoroughly. Julia, who clearly remembered what was left in the letters, closed her eyes and buried herself deep on the sofa. It was too risky to pass, so she needed to worry. No, what's the use of agonizing? From the beginning, she had known she couldn't throw her away and started. No, she had done it because she hadn't known she was going to face such a tragedy with that vulgar bitch and the crown prince, the scarecrow. The letters did not have her direct instructions, but they contained quite a few metaphors, which were enough for the crown prince to attack her under the pretext. If Lyra, who was being investigated as a sinner, had revealed it, she would have been involved in this incident. I can't help it. First of all, I have to listen to what she wants. As she could no longer weaken her power, Julia, who breathed a deep sigh, straightened her posture and said to the butler. Paper and pen. Yes. Julia gave the written letter, which asked what Lyra wanted, to the butler, and rapped her head, thinking about how to finish the wicked rat. "I wouldn't throw you away, Lady Lyra. I was just a little busy going to Croa. I'll get back to you soon." Lyra blushed at the hope she had obtained after several letters to Julia. It was foolish of her to listen to such threats. She had been asked to incinerate the letters they had exchanged even before things went wrong, but she had gathered them in case and finally achieved what she wanted. "If I keep them there, no one will ever find it." She had confided with Cain just in case. She had also asked to punish Julia with them if she went wrong. It was disturbing to leave it to him, who was possessed by a daughter of a prostitute, but unfortunately, she had no one else to turn to. She wanted to ask for help from her father, but the Count seemed to have no intention of helping her at all. She heard he was hard to move, but no matter how hard he was, he never called her. And she cried in sorrow, but rather, she felt injustice and anger. "My father abandoned me first. If I had known this would happen, I would have pushed him higher." In a terrible imagination, Lyra gritted her teeth. Now the only person Lyra could rely on was Cain. No matter how possessed he was by a prostitute's daughter, he wouldn't abandon his own sister. So she waited for Julia to contact her endlessly, and suddenly there was an uproar outside. When she looked outside through the windows that were tightly closed, she could see a colorful carriage that she couldn't easily see. It was a carriage with a seal that Lyra knew, though it was a little far away. "Don't tell me." It was none other than the Crown Prince who got off the wagon. She could see Celine, who had always been busy, if she had gotten in touch beforehand, greeting him with joy, even refusing to go out. Next to her was the Countess. Although she could not see in detail as the iron bars were added in and out of the windows to prevent her escape, they enjoyed the joy of reunion in front of the carriage for a long time. It was so disturbing. 2 knights armed thoroughly were seen behind the Crown Prince. A decently dressed aristocrat was also with him. If his purpose was simply to meet Celine, his followers would not have accompanied him. It was clear that there was another purpose. Then she narrowed her eyes and doubted, and Asher, who had finished his reunion with Celine, raised his head and turned to her room. As she had the guilt of sin, she felt her heart sink heavy. It was only then that Lyra realized that he had come to see her. "If you don't have a schedule today, why don't you go out with me?" "It's not that I have a schedule. I was going to go to the academy when Mr. Asher returned. Corinne said she have a class today. I visited on the wrong day. I wish I had checked in advance." A moment later, the voices of Celine and Asher from outside the door made the whole body of Lyra nervous. She had been focusing on Julia for a while, and she had forgotten the investigation for the hallucinogen, but she couldn't believe the Crown Prince would visit her himself. "Can you spare me a little time, though? If you don't have time, I'll go with you to the academy. Everyone will be surprised if you do. I'm hoping. That way, there will be fewer people who can go near you. I'm always worried. I'm always thinking about you, but Mr. Asher is too worried. I can't help but worry. Don't you feel the gaze around you? If I could, I'd follow you around and all those eyes." As if to warn her, the voice of Asher was gloomy. Celine, smiling a little, cut off his words with a gentle voice as if to placate the child. "I see. Let's talk after we finish our work. I have to prepare." It wouldn't be a bad idea to go out with Mr. Asher's wagon. At the end of their conversation, Lyra backed away to the furthest wall from the door as she was surprised. Sure enough, there was the sound of the iron chains loosening, which had been firmly locked. She could hear the sound for a long time. Then, a moment later, the Crown Prince and 2 knights, who she had seen through the windows, and a nobleman, who she didn't know, came into sight. Next to him was Celine, accompanied by a maid. Asher, a cool-faced man who was completely different from Asher who Lyra remembered, pointed to her and ordered the knights. He looked as if he were looking at a troublesome baggage. "Drag her out." As soon as the order of Asher fell, 2 knights went straight into the room and seized Lyra's arms. They seemed to be really trying to pull her out since Asher ordered them to. Where am I going?" Lyra, embarrassed, asked, but no one minded her. They forced Lyra out of the room with a strong squeeze on her arms beyond necessity. Well, I'll just go out on my own. There can't be such a choice for a criminal. Tears welled up in Lyra's eyes at the words of the nobleman, who was following her with a sneer. She didn't know where she was being dragged, but at this rate, it was clear she would be consumed as entertainment for those below. I thought you lost your weight a lot, but you're fine. I'm sure you haven't had much trouble yet. Her anger flared at Celine's voice, which ran through her ear only. It was similar to what Lyra had done before Celine had been killed for being a wicked woman. It's all because of you. If it wasn't for you. If it wasn't for you. Suddenly, Lyra made a scene, and Celine shrank into fear, pretending that she didn't know. It was a clear expression and gesture of a victim. Chapter 187. The abominable sight deepened Lyra's anger, and her arms were strongly tightened by the knights. Celine raised the corners of her mouth as if to make fun of her. It was in Lyra's eyes and she was struggling. Slap. Suddenly, the pain was felt in her cheek, and her vision changed in an instant. And there was silence in the hall which was noisy with the severe struggle of Lyra. She did not know that was happening. As she slowly turned her head back to the other side, she saw Celine, who opened her eyes wide and covered her mouth with her palms, as if she was truly surprised. If you make any more fuss, I'll put you in the Imperial Underground Prison. It was the Crown Prince who uttered a warning recitation. As if he had touched something dirty, he shook his hand and strode forward. Oh, my God, look at that swollen cheek. Left behind Annie's mocking remarks, Lyra was dragged away in embarrassment. Shock, fear, and confusion of the first violence caused to stop Lyra's thinking. The interrogation was supposed to be done in the lounge, and she faced servants and maids of the mansion several times as she passed the hall and stairs to the lounge. They all glanced at Lyra's red, swollen cheek with astonishment. Unlike when dealing with Celine, the cold Crown Prince's walking also caused questions for them. As soon as she reached the lounge, Darian stood in front of the lounge as if he had been waiting. Darian looked at his sister's cheek for a long time, apparently surprised by Lyra's poor appearance. Asher described the situation with a light smile. She didn't follow the directions, making a fuss. She dared to run into the victim, Lady Celine. She still seems to have no sense of guilt. The detention in the mansion seems more comfortable than I thought. Darian, who hesitated for a moment at the words, turned his gaze away from Lyra. Please come in. The expression of Darian who answered like that was very complicated. It was close to the expression that he wanted to get angry, but couldn't. Asher looked at Darian as if he looked at Lyra, and he soon turned to the lounge and entered the parlor. Brother. Lyra, who was dragged behind him, called Darian anxiously, but he could not give Lyra any answer. In the parlor where the door was closed, there were two knights, Asher, and Lyra, and an unknown nobleman. On the table lay refreshments prepared in advance by servants at Darian's instruction. Asher looked over the document handed by the nobleman, with a bothered face, and took one of them into his mouth. You're not the young adults, but the young ladies who are still underage, and you took hallucinogens. It's pretty shocking. Well, When Lyra tried to make an excuse at the words of Asher, the knights holding her arms gave their strength. It seemed to mean that she should not make an excuse until the Crown Prince himself asked questions. I'm trying to say no, but I can't even bring it up. Lyra was so bitter and resentful about the whole thing. How many ladies took hallucinogens except you? In fact, he did not check whether or not it was true, but he was convinced that they had taken hallucinogens, and when asked on the premise of it, Lyra shook her head vigorously and denied it. No one really took any hallucinogens. Really? The expression of Asher, asking again, was very apathetic. It was as if he were listening to a useless story. The nobleman next to him did not seem to value much of Lyra's answer. However, since there is no proof that it is not, you can't prove it. There's no proof of that we did that, is there? Lyra was furious at Asher's insistence, but it was soon denied by him. There is. What? That's ridiculous. Asher recited her sins personally to Lyra, who was stuttering. You strongly insisted that you had seen Lady Celine that was not in the mansion at that time, and you wouldn't make such an argument unless you had taken a hallucinogen. Actually, it was you who had pushed the count. The nobleman replied affirmatively to the words of Asher. Maybe the hallucinogen ingredient was still in her body. Maybe she hid it in her room and took it. There's a point. Write it down like that. Yes, Mr. Asterope. The nobleman began to write something on the papers at the instruction of Asher. He seemed to write that Lyra had not yet escaped the hallucinogen. She began to struggle in response. Well, that's enough. Stop it. I really didn't take any hallucinogens. It's just your trust. Why don't you listen to me? Why doesn't anyone believe me? It was very sad to see her resisting with tears scattered over her eyes. It seemed genuinely unjust. If the investigator was not Asher, he would change his mind a little bit and might try to release the injustice. Okay. I'll forgive you if you tell the truth from now on. My heart aches when a young lady utters such a great pain. Is it true that you saw Lady Celine that day, really? Unexpectedly, he asked Lyra with a very serious face, whether it was the same as Asher. He looked as if he would give her a last chance. That can't be true. In addition, even the question was strange. Of all the many questions, why would he ask about it again? Doubt sprang up. Celine's lover, he couldn't help herself. But it seemed to anyone that the current Asher would help Lyra. Lyra, who had hesitated a little, glanced sideways. There were 2 knights together, including the unknown nobleman, who had the potential to be witnesses if Asher would back out later. Of course, if she were sane, she would have quickly realized that they would not be able to take her side, but now she was in a state of mental straits and was unable to think properly. Then she trusted Asher and began to confide in him. Oh, yes. I really saw her. She was in the room. I called her. My father was in the hallway, too. Well, what did you mean you saw me? That's. She recalled the memory that she had shouted like that in the court, and Lyra, who hesitated for a while, nodded her head and said yes. She believed in Asher's words that he would forgive her if she was honest with him. I saw you suddenly appear and take my sister. Gone like a vision? That's. Yes. It looked like magic, didn't it? I showed up at an important moment and took Lady Celine and disappeared. My God. That's right. It looked magical. You'd really gone. I'd been wondering if I'd seen it wrong for a long time. But you also showed up at the place. Asher described the situation at that time with such accuracy as to be portrayed, and Lyra nodded her head in excessive affirmation. It was clear that he had appeared magically and taken Celine away. Did he really move in space? It was a ridiculous assumption, but assuming so, all the puzzles fit. All he had to do was move through space to show up where he couldn't get there on time. If this fact is revealed, my sin will also disappear. The evidence will be useless. If so, I will regain the title of the saint, and the vulgar wicked woman will go back to being a wicked woman. While looking at Lyra, who smiled brightly with the thoughts, for a short while, Asher, who looked serious, smiled at the corners of his mouth. Lyra's whole body stiffened to the look of mockery. He's been listening seriously for a while now, but what the hell is going on here? I think the hallucinogen is right. The knights holding Lyra's arms sighed at the nobleman's words. It looked as if they regarded her words as the nonsense of a lunatic. Yes, that's what I think. She did it last time, but I didn't expect it again this time. Do you think it makes sense to tell me that I disappeared like smoke? I think she's had it for a long time. Magic, that's ridiculous. It's a terrible drug for such a young lady. I don't know how many more nobles will have to investigate. For now, we should start investigating the young ladies who participated in the party. It's true that she took a hallucinogen, so I don't have to accompany you in the future. Investigate her thoroughly and find out where it came from. Yes, I see. At this point, I'll root it out thoroughly. Chapter 188. Lyra's eyes began to shake like a sailing boat that met a typhoon, with a very simple finish, dismissive of herself as if she were not there. He said he'd forgive me if I'm honest with him, but why is this conclusion that I've taken the hallucinogen? The Crown Prince clearly described it as if he knew it, agreeing with me and calling it out magic. When something was going wrong, Lyra stammered and asked Asher, "You said you'd forgive me if I am honest with you." "I told you the truth, but what are you talking about?" Asher answered, shedding a cold glance at her. "I said I'd forgive you, but I didn't say I'd take legal action. Besides, we can't make sure your words are true, can't we?" "Yes, sir. What's certain now is that Lady Lyra has taken the hallucinogen." Then Lyra, who realized that what Asher had said was a trap, lost her speech and fell to the floor in a panic. "That's enough for today. As you saw it earlier, I have an important business to attend to." "Oh, come to think of it, it isn't the moment to waste your time in this useless work." "I understand." After all, he got up from his seat, dismissing this important task, which would completely change the lives of countless people. The nobleman who came with him also put in his arms a document fully written something, saying, the investigation was done smoothly, and Lyra, who was also held up by the knights, was forced to rise. It was a short investigation that only fit in according to a predetermined result. "No, wait a minute. Please. Really not." No one heard such a cry from Lyra. After a short interrogation, Celine came up to Asher with a very surprised look as they went out of the lounge. Her appearance was almost unchanged compared to when she had said she was getting ready to go out. She seemed to have been curious about the result. Perhaps she had been curious about Lyra's face, not the result, but the tears that she would have dropped. "Are you done with it?" Yes, it was so obvious that she had taken a hallucinogen that we didn't have to do a long interrogation. The servants and maids were also around. When he called out the hallucinogens she had not taken, they could not hide their astonished faces. As he saw them, they seemed eager to talk about this amazing news. What an interesting story to hear was that she had tried to kill her father and even tried hallucinogenic drugs. Each of them might want to put together a fragmented puzzle and discuss how horrible things Lyra had done. The unwritten rule that what happened in the mansion should not be taken out of their mouth was not related to this incident, because there were the Crown Prince and Celine to forgive them. "I see. I hoped a little bit it's not." Celine's gaze at Lyra, who was holding her arms, was colored with regret. To console her, Asher suggested the change of surroundings. Until just now, he had a cold look that seemed to be annoying, but it was gone now, and he faced Celine as if she was very cute, like another person. "Why don't we go for a walk now as the investigation and the preparation are done? It would be nice to drink tea." "But I'm worried about Lyra. How can I be the only one to enjoy such luxury?" "Don't worry. She's not going to be punished for anything she didn't. I'm worried you will fall." Celine, who glanced at Lyra and hesitated, but nodded her head again, was truly detestable. "Who drove me into this mud? Who really needs to be comforted is me, but why are those who don't pay any price to change their moods?" Moreover, Darian, who was the only one who would help, only occasionally glared at Asher. Where did his pledge go when he said he would be acting as the head of the county family and lock up Celine? He seemed to be too busy every day just doing what the Count had to do, let alone Celine. So Celine was so friendly with the Crown Prince, but he couldn't say anything. Everything was pathetic. Everyone was foolish. The wicked woman who was really to be punished was laughing with happiness. She was so dark about herself that she must get the light. With such a sense of deprivation and injustice, there was no other way to resolve it, and she could see someone entering the mansion. He was a very familiar figure. He was the butler of the Duke family who she had been waiting for. He held a letter in his hand. Besides, he didn't order a servant to take, and the butler brought the letter himself. It was clear that the letter contained important contents of. When the butler saw Lyra, who was caught by the knights, he was briefly embarrassed, and immediately handed over the letter to Darian, saying, "I have a letter to her." "What letter?" As everyone was present there, he asked Darian about the contents of the letter. Then Lyra was nervous and swallowing her saliva, and Darian, with a determined face, shook his head and answered, "It's a personal business." You don't have to know. Darian's response to the question of whether it was unfair that he had never stood up to Asher until now had a thorn in it. At most, it was the story of the letter, but Darian's excessive reaction made him laugh again. Oh, I see. It was a letter from the Duke family, so I thought its destination was not you, but Lady Lyra, and I must have misunderstood. He called his remarks a misunderstanding, but his expression was with suspicion. It was a face that suspected that the real destination of the letter was Lyra. It was the same with Celine. The eyes of Celine were fixed on the letter, who had just blushed so far, saying she was worried about Lyra. In the end, Lyra, anxious that the letter that would save her would fall into the hands of the demons, opened her mouth in a trembling voice. This is the end of the investigation. I want to go back to my room. The combination of psychological pressure and desire to live looked very sad and pathetic. They could think of her as if she were a saint. She looks really bad. We'd better get her some rest. For poor Lyra, the kind-hearted Celine said so, and the ungrateful permission of Asher fell so that Lyra could soon return to her room and restore stability. Then, after a while, Darian, who asked for a visit, appeared with the letter. He looked very serious as if he had read the contents beforehand. Are you really going to accept this? Is there another way to do it? If there's rebellion, I'll be cleared of my sin, so there's no other way. Darian bit his lips at Lyra's reply and was overcome with anxiety. It would be better if you just wait like this and then try another trial again after the rebellion. No, I can't go on like this until then. You can help me run away well. Besides, I have something to say to Isis. She could be sure by the interrogation of Asher. It had to be told, what she had seen on that day without really taking the hallucinogen. So Lyra's expression was as serious as ever. An irreversible choice. I'll send a maid, so you can sneak out. We'll leave straight for Croa, so there's only one chance. By the time she was ready to read and memorize the contents of the letter, a maid came in with a meal. Her face was full of freckles, so it was hard to recognize her features, but she was a maid with blonde hair and green eyes. Lyra jumped out of her seat, welcoming the maid whom she had never seen before. Please have dinner. Yeah. As the maid said, Lyra started eating. If she didn't make any sound, they would be suspicious of her from the outside, and she crashed the dishes to make a sound. In the meantime, the woman on the opposite side took out the makeup tools from her arms and drew the freckles on Lyra's face. She took off her clothes and exchanged them with Lyra. The features themselves were too different to be perfect, but the maid's face was full of freckles and similar in height and shape, so it was hard to notice if they didn't look at her closely. Get out of here straight. A carriage is waiting at the entrance to the mansion. Chapter 189. After reading the words on her palm, she hid the joy of bursting and took the tableware. She thought she could get out of this hellish mansion at last, and even tears seemed to come out. Now she and Julia were leaving for Croa, would rebel, and she vowed to kill the stupid crown prince and the vulgar bitch. She was about to leave the room with her head down, and the guard at the door called Lyra. Wait a minute. Her whole body stiffened with a feeling of her heart pounding. The guard asked Lyra, who was in a cold sweat and froze. I think the mealtime today is earlier than usual. Is that so? I just brought it as I was told. Otherwise, it was a high, thin voice, but it was like a child's, as she created a higher and thinner voice, to hide her voice. So she thought she made a mistake and bit her lips tightly, but the guard, who was thinking for a while, nodded. Really? Go. You have to get some water, right? Yes, yes. As soon as permission fell, she hurried down to the first floor, and Darian, who looked anxious, was standing at the front door of the mansion. Lyra, who roughly laid down the tableware on the floor, hurried to him. Brother. No, master. Then, as usual, she tried to call Darian, but she looked around and corrected it. It was an empty hall with no one in it, but just in case. You're here. A carriage from the Duke family is waiting. Then the nervous Darian clasped Lyra's hands. Lyra was stubborn and there was no way to help otherwise, but he seemed to worry about letting her sister, who had not yet grown up, go. "I've packed it up, just in case. Take it and use it when there's an emergency." The pouch Darian handed over was full of expensive jewels. Julia was not going to make a fool of her because Julia had already been under threat by her letter, but Lyra felt more secure than leaving the mansion without anything. Brother. She had always swallowed her anger because he was not helpful, but she felt strange to be seen off like this. She hugged Darian once and quickly left in a prepared carriage right in front of the mansion. It was sent by Julia. The carriage seemed to head straight for the Duke mansion, but then turned around and arrived just outside the capital. So, with uneasiness, as she carefully stepped out of the carriage at the order of the driver, two large, sturdy-looking carriages were waiting for Lyra. One was a carriage for Julia alone, and the other was a carriage with maids and luggage. Julia, who got off the wagon upon Lyra's arrival, greeted her with a gentle welcome. "Miss Julia. Lady Lyra. I've been waiting. Did you have a hard time?" "No, no. This is how Miss Julia helped me." Like menacing and intimidating people, what they really wanted to ask each other was a deep-seated, pretentious smile. Julia wrapped around Lyra's shoulders and guided her to her carriage. "I was about to leave. I'm not officially married yet, so I'll leave secretly. You know that, right?" "Sure. Haven't we talked about it several times already?" When she got on the wagon, Lyra fell asleep as it was covered with soft cushions to sleep. It was because she had been working all day on escape. Julia, who hid a cold look from Lyra's appearance, asked, "The letters, did you bring them?" "No, I couldn't have brought something so important. I might be caught and kept it hidden. My brother said he would take good care of them." So when she answered in such a tone of voice that they would never find it, there was silence in the carriage for a moment. The letters were the things that would save her from hell. And something that would save her and protect her in the future, too. "I can't tell you such important things like that easily." What a stupid question it is. Of course, after the treason, the value as evidence will become unclear, but until then, it would guarantee her freedom. So, before that, I'll marry Oscar and create a new shield to protect me. So thinking of it, Lyra smiled, and Julia smiled along. "Yes, I see. You did a great job. Please be careful not to be seen by anyone." So Lyra, who managed to find her freedom, left the Empire with Julia and headed for the Kingdom of Croa. Although it was a carriage with 2 women on board, she did not go on vacation or trip, so it ran to Croa without stopping, except for a very short break for a meal and a replacement for a horse. "From now on, you will be my maid, Elle." As soon as they crossed the border of Croa, Lyra nodded at Julia, who asked to do so. A new identity card was also included. It was a natural result because it was not possible for her to say boldly that she had fled in sin. Rumors that Lyra had fled had spread quickly to other countries. As she had a quick movement in Julia's carriage, she was not inspected, but from now on, she had to be careful. "Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you." At the tone and expression of Lyra, who was very serious, Julia raised his eyebrows and urged her to speak the next words. "I'm sure the princess knows. That wicked woman was really with me when my father fell down the stairs. And the fact that unless I was crazy, I wouldn't have taken the hallucinogen before something important." At Lyra's words, Julia remained positive. Julia seemed to think that the only chance Lyra had ever had with so much love of Oscar would not have been ruined by lies and hallucinogens. Lyra, who gained confidence, confessed what she had guessed alone to seize another chance. That day, the Crown Prince really showed up. He suddenly appeared like he was moving through space. Then he hid himself with her right in front of me. It's like he moved through space again. What are you talking about? Moving through space? When she heard the words carefully as if Lyra confided a secret, Julia asked again with a slight frown. So, the Crown Prince is doing magic. The forehead of Julia furrowed a little more, contrary to Lyra, who spoke as if it was a great secret. And what followed was sudden uncontrollable laughter, for a ridiculous delusion of nonsense. I'm sorry, but I understand why you were accused of hallucinogenic drugs. I'm telling you the truth. It makes sense to assume that the Crown Prince has the magic to move through space. I see. It was an affirmative tone, but it wasn't the way. There was a deep suspicion on Julia's face as she listened to Lyra's story. Lyra, who noticed that Julia didn't trust her, claimed several times that the Crown Prince had a strange power. Lyra said that until the carriage arrived in the capital of the Kingdom of Croa. So Lyra continued to insist on the absurd power of Asher, and Julia, who was impatient, advised her. Okay, I know what you mean, and I think His Highness might have that kind of ability. Ms. Julia. She was about to be pleased, as she said that she believed her, but Julia continued her words that were not over yet. But if you want to stay there for a long time, you'd better not say anything you can't prove unless you want to be accused of taking a hallucinogen again. You know that the words without evidence are no help. Lyra's whole body stiffened with the tone as if she was carrying an annoying burden. Really, the Crown Prince has a strange ability. It's true. If she was going to rebel, Julia should know. How could she beat a man who could move through space? It was a matter of knowing for the aristocratic party and Lyra herself, not for Julia alone. Still, Julia's expression was cold, and Lyra could not speak anymore, and she was still silent. Then the carriage, which had been running for a long time, slowed down and then stopped moving. We're here. And when she heard the voice outside, she realized that she had finally reached her destination, and when he removed the curtains from the window and looked carefully outside, she saw the magnificent castle. Don't say, is it a royal castle? She thought it would be late at night and they would take a rest somewhere, and enter the castle by day, but Julia was soon to be the Queen of Croa, and it was right to go to the royal castle. Chapter 190. As she suddenly faced the royal castle, her steps of getting out of the carriage were very cautious. It was also because of the quietness of the royal castle, which was too quiet for its huge size. Lyra followed Julia in the back, looking sideways pretending to be a maid, and soon a group of people approached Julia and her party. I see Croa Lohan. Julia, who realized that it was Croa Lohan, the King of Croa, even though it was a distance that she could not confirm, took a courtesy. The knights and servants followed her, and Lyra also bent quickly. You've been struggling from coming away, Lady Julia. A moment later, the King of Croa, who had come closer, welcomed Julia's visit with a kind voice. Am I meeting the king of a country so simply? Then, realizing how great Julia was, Lyra glanced up at and checked the King of Croa. He's so young. He looked at a similar age of the Crown Prince of the Empire. When she had heard Julia was going to marry the king of a country, she had thought he would be a middle-aged man, but he was a young man with a manly face. It's true that the great King of Croa died early in an unexpected illness. It reminded her of the fact that the prince who just became an adult had followed him, and Lohan, the young King of Croa, was a rare handsome man. He felt insidious to some extent, but because of that, he was more eye-catching. Lohan, who had been in a conversation with Julia for a moment, glanced at Lyra as if he felt a glimpse at himself. Without knowing herself, the painted freckles had been erased and her neat face was seen. Lyra, who had the sudden eye contact, was surprised and lowered her head and hid it from his view, and Lohan put her on the topic as if her reaction was funny. It's amazing every time I see a blonde, as there is very little blonde hair in Croa, and a pale green eye that looks like grass leaves. It reminds me of someone. Isn't she like a fairy? Not common in the Empire, but more than in Croa, and they are often born among the commoners. When he was interested in Lyra, who had to be quiet, Julia replied with nervousness without having time to rethink as she heard that he was reminded of someone. Lohan asked her name with an interesting look. Well, I'm Elle. Elle? It's a name that doesn't fit this beautiful girl. Thank you. Blushing her face, Lyra glanced at Lohan's face with excessive praise. He stared at Lyra with a smile of interest and goodwill, as if he were appreciating her. Perhaps, the King of Croa would take my words seriously. Lyra, who had only received the goodwill and kindness of all the people of the world, dared to speak to the king of a country first. She was sure that he would listen to her, as it had been so far, and it was something that she must tell in order to survive. Mr. Croa Lohan. I have something I must tell you, that you must know. When a maid dared speak to the king of a country first, everyone in the place was suddenly hard as stone. The most embarrassing of all was Julia, who had just heard Lyra's nonsense, and she stuttered and reprimanded Lyra. What the hell is this? Can't you shut up right now? Lyra squeezed her eyes shut and shrank back at the overreaction of Julia. She looked like a frightened baby cat. Both of them were rude and frivolous, who dared to play in front of a king of a country, but Lohan, watching them for a moment, said with a meaningful smile. Okay, I'm interested. It's late for today, so I'll send someone tomorrow. I'm very curious about what it's about. Julia's face was blue, and Lyra smiled brightly. If I accuse the crown prince's power and reveal it as a fact and make a great contribution to the rebellion, I believe that I will have a way to live without relying on Julia. What the hell did you say that? As soon as she entered the room, Julia, who had all the servants leave, was angry with Lyra. She had given so much attention on their way to Croa, but she had brought out the story of the crown prince to the young king of Croa, Lohan. You dared not to know who you were and lied. But Lyra could not judge the situation properly, and she spoke in a low voice. He has to know, and he'll be ready. If not, he'll ruin everything you've done. Lady Lyra. He'll be embarrassed at first, but he'll believe me. It's true. If he doesn't believe me, he'll regret it. Julia, who was angry at the continuing Lyra's claim, frowned and sighed. It had already happened, and Lyra was stubborn, and even Lohan had offered to send someone. It was irreversible. If Lyra was a simple maid, she would say she would have been crazy and kick her out, but she was a bomb who had very important letters. If only you go wrong. When Julia confessed her frustration, Lyra realized what she was worried about and added something to relieve Julia's worries. Oh, my God. I was not wary of that. Don't worry. I'll take all responsibility for this. I swear. With this, Julia's expression changed. If she had brought herself to the risk and killed herself, Darian, who had no place to attack, would not be able to release the letters. No, if she added that she had almost missed a big deal because of Lyra, he might have to live with a sinful mind and atone for the rest of his life. Julia had been worried about when and how to throw Lyra away anyway, so she thought it would not be too bad to use this opportunity. Then you shall leave it in writing, and I shall send one to the mansion of Count Roscent. So I better make sure. Julia took out the letter paper, and Lyra nodded. Lyra seemed to think that the young king of Croa would believe her, as a child who did not know what the world was, very foolishly. Okay. Julia had never thought their relationship would fall out like this just a year ago. It was a relationship that she could be her family, but now they were enemies who had sharp claws toward each other. I'll ask you to sign at the end, and I also want you to sign on top of the 2 letters, as proof that I didn't forge them. I see. When Lyra handed both of the carefully written letters to Julia, Julia regained her bright face, satisfied, and somehow, she looked happy. Unlike Lyra, who was a fool, the wise Lohan could not believe Lyra's words. They spent the night with different ideas and purposes and became the next day. His Highness calls you. Lyra, who had been stiff with tension since last night, jumped up from her seat. She was nervous enough that she couldn't even make a good breakfast. She followed the servant, hoping that the young king of Croa would be wise and trust her. No, she thought, he would believe her because what she had seen was the truth. She was breathing fast in front of Lohan's office, a long way from the quarters where Lyra was staying when the huge door opened without a word. Lyra, surprised, bowed her head hurriedly, with a courtesy. I see you, Your Highness. You don't have to give me such a courtesy, come closer. She raised her head at Lohan's command and slowly approached him. His silver hair, shining in the light from the window, was a little mysterious, and for a moment she was taken away because he was uncommonly colored in the Empire, and his gold eyes were as beautiful as the sun. It was a beauty that was different from Oscar's, which was always cool. I want to finish talking about what you wanted to say yesterday. Lyra, who had been taken a moment by Lohan, was suddenly reddened with embarrassment. I was fascinated by a man's face when I came to tell an important story. She blamed herself, and then she came to her senses, swallowed, and answered carefully. Ah, yes, you may already know, but the Crown Prince of the Empire has a special ability and I thought I should let you know it. It will be a great distraction to your walk. Oh, it's disturbing to me. That must be important. What is the Crown Prince's special ability? Lohan, with a curious look, urged Lyra's next words, apparently interested in blocking his future walk, just as she had seen last night. Chapter 191. The young king was a wise man as expected, and Lyra, who had relaxed a little and was confident, told the Crown Prince's secret. It's the ability to suddenly appear and hide as if he's moving freely through space. He narrowed his eyes at Lyra's accusation. A special ability. He could move through space freely. He seemed to reflect on what Lyra said. Lohan's expression that had been interesting just before had been gone somewhere, and he was thoughtful with a very serious expression. At his suddenly changed attitude, Lyra touched her fingers and waited nervously for his response. Well, I don't understand what you mean. Even though he's the Crown Prince of the Empire, is that possible? Lohan's face was full of questions, but it was not the same tone of reprimand or convulsion as the others, and it was purely a question of whether it was possible. Lyra raised her voice and put her strength into her words. I saw it myself. You saw it yourself? The Crown Prince of the Empire moving through space? Where did you see it? Well, at the mansion of Count Virmont of the Empire. When I worked there for a while, I saw it, when the Count fell down the stairs. I saw him suddenly appear and disappear, like a mirage. What is the easy word to persuade as to the truth mixed with lies? Lohan replied while raising his eyebrows as she allegedly mentioned the case. At the mansion of Count Virmont. Alas, you are talking about the terrible incident that her own daughter tried to kill her own father, the Count. Lyra's case of pushing the Count down the stairs seemed to have spread beyond the Empire to Croa. But the words, Arya pushed the Count, did not seem to have spread, and Lyra tried to cover up her rage that was rising again and corrected him. So was the verdict, but I saw it. Lady Arya really pushed the Count and then the Crown Prince appeared, and they disappeared like smoke. It's true. He raised the corners of his mouth and laughed at her offended look. She was not sure what it meant, so Lyra persuaded him again. I know you can't believe it because I'm still having a hard time believing it myself. Poor Miss Lyra. But if I discuss lies, I'll have a strict punishment, and I don't need to say lies. I hope you will understand my desire to confess and help you a little. Lyra's words, which even called herself poor, had some point unless she was mad. She would not claim to the king of a country that the Crown Prince had a special ability. If she was wrong, she could lose her head. Of course, she was the maid Julia brought, and he could not have killed her so simply, but she could have been strictly punished, as Lyra had said. For example, her tongue would be cut off. But the wiser Lohan did not make such a cruel decision. Instead, he asked the person who had given him important information for a long time. Yes, I think it makes sense. But what do you think? Vika. She looked around, embarrassed by the sudden call of another man's name, and she noticed a man sitting on a sofa at a corner she had not looked at before. Layers Vika. He was a nobleman of the Empire who had occasionally advised Julia, and Lyra knew him well. As she had been hiding her identity and pretending to be a maid, her twitching nose reflected her nervousness and the cold sweat on her forehead. Vika, who confirmed this, smiled strangely at the welcome face he had met for a long time. I think it makes sense. I remember that His Highness the Crown Prince moved through areas strangely fast, and he was quite quick in that case, too. I couldn't think of moving with the aristocratic lady. Luckily, Vika was going to pretend he didn't know Lyra. And I don't think it's too bad to overestimate him for his special ability even if she's lying. At Vika's strong supporting statements, Lohan nodded. Rather than underestimating and neglecting, as he said, there would be nothing to lose from overestimating and preparing thoroughly. All right, so I can believe what Vika says too, and I'll trust you. Her legs were shaking at the satisfaction of his expression and answer because she was so nervous apart from the conviction that he would believe it. Lohan helped her as she didn't know when he had gotten up, and so his broad, hard chest touched the side of her face. Your Majesty. I'd like to have lunch with the benefactor who gave me valuable information, but do you have a schedule? His eyes and hair were shining, and she felt sweet, and he was beautiful enough to make Lyra's white, immaculate face red. I have Oscar, and he is the man who will be Julia's husband. She had never felt this way about another man except for Oscar, and when she stuttered, Vika answered on her behalf. She's a maid moving with Julia, and of course there's no particular schedule, and Your Majesty, may I join you at your meal? You ask me a matter of course. She thought it was a story for two to eat, and she was overly nervous, but eventually, Julia also joined the lunch, and the four of them ate lunch. In the meal that followed, Julia, who had had no doubt that Lyra would be punished, stared at Lyra across the room, unbelieving. Your maid is very clever. He seemed to have believed that the crown prince was moving through space and even praised her. He was quite cool and rational, as she recalled from the written conversations with him. He was never a man to be convinced of the absurd delusion of a young girl. It was hard for Julia to understand what was happening. Thank you. Julia was wary of him and answered. Although it was a very elaborate luncheon, she did not feel the taste of the food. I like your eyes, too. Those are the eyes of the one who is ambitious, so I want to talk to you a little more. Lyra blushed and lowered her head. Lohan asked her, smiling as if she was cute. I would like to take her as my maid if Lady Julia will allow me. He was even speaking out a word that was genuine or false, and was being friendly to Lyra, who was blushing, unable to figure out who she was now. And Vika, who had arrived earlier than scheduled, was also friendly to Lyra. Julia looked at Vika, not sure what was going on, but he shrugged and turned the topic away. Julia wondered how he had interpreted her gaze. Mr. Lohan, I think it's best to discuss the national marriage as Ms. Julia arrived in Croa. National marriage? Lohan suddenly asked back, at the words, national marriage. It was as if he had never heard of it before, and Julia's face was hard as stone. Yes? Yes. You decided to marry Julia, right? Vika also asked back as if he was in trouble. And then, understanding what Vika meant, Lohan stopped his meal and said, mockingly. Oh, that's what you said. So did Miss Julia visit Croa for nothing? I think you're mistaken, but it was a reward with the premise that if you take the empire, and I'm not going to do it without proving your value. I'm sure I must have notified you in writing. What is that? Shouldn't we have a national marriage and attack the empire? Julia, who had been so embarrassed that she forgot to blink, looked at Lohan with a pale face. However, Lohan began eating again as if he had said something unscrupulous. Oh, did you? I didn't know that far. Now I understand you have exchanged those words. I'm sure it's better to do it. Mr. Vika. And even Vika, who was sure to know all about what had happened, took his side. I started this asking his advice, and what the hell is this? Julia's eyes wandered as if she had suddenly been thrown into the middle of a storm. Vika laughed and added a word for Julia. The empire will soon fall into your hands as the preparations are perfect, Miss Julia. I suppose so. Julia's mind was in a hurry. Her hands trembled, and the idea of attacking the empire as soon as possible to establish her position dominated her mind. There was a smile on the faces of Lohan and Vika as they watched her. Then our preparations are all done, so we'd better start right away, wouldn't we? Lady Julia? Chapter 192. As he asked Julia, Lohan smiled, and Julia, who was in a hurry, nodded and said yes. It was in a way that was not hers. Lohan said, smiling contentedly, and everything was as planned. Good. I thought it was time to move. I'm excited to see the end soon. Then, before we move forward, we'd better have a quick cup of tea and meet the Marquis of Renard. The Marquis of Renard. Yes, he is a very important man for achieving my purpose. He is the one who prepared soldiers to send to the Empire, and I think you will be greatly helped. If she remembered those papers exchanged in the meantime, it was clear that there were not a few people involved in this, but this was the first time that she was introduced to a person other than Lohan. When Julia was puzzled, Lohan added an explanation. He was very passionate about what he wanted because he was a man who had a strong desire. He was the one who has reported only in writing, but when he heard that Miss Julia was in the Empire, he suddenly said he would report it in face-to-face. It's not a prearranged event, but you can count on it. Because he added that she could expect it, Julia and Lyra waited for tea time, their eyes shining. Vika also seemed to expect it for another reason. With such a complex feeling and emotion, they finished the luncheon and moved to the palace garden. There, the Marquis of Renard, who had arrived at the royal castle in advance, was waiting for Lohan in the garden. It's been a long time, Marquis. You've been here first. I see you, Your Majesty. Lohan spoke to the Marquis of Renard in a friendly tone, while the Marquis looked hard and his head was lowered. He was a man of old age, who seemed to have already retired, with white hair. Does he have no children? If so, he might have adopted a relative of his family, and it was doubtful to Julia and Lyra that he had kept the position of the Marquis until now. He is an old man who has his personal matter and has not been able to pass his title to his successor until he is old, but since he is the only Marquis of Croa, you should refrain from such a dumb face. As Lohan hardened his facial expression as if he had read the strange feelings of Julia and Lyra, they realized their rudeness and quickly corrected their faces. I see the Princess of the Empire. Nice to meet you, Marquis Renard. After such a short introduction, the conversation was cut off, and Lohan, who had taken a sip of tea alone in a tense atmosphere, led the conversation. Are the soldiers and knights ready to move any time? Yes, they are now in a state of being able to move to the Empire. That's good. Did you say 5,000 people? Yes, but I can get 5,000 more. Lyra's cheeks were red with excitement as she heard that a total of 10,000 people could head straight for the Empire. It was still not enough to formally invade, but they were enough to hide in the Empire with the help of Julia and the aristocratic party. If they did the sudden attack, it would be a matter of time before she could take the imperial castle, and if the crown prince and Celine disappeared, she could make her sin disappear. What do you think, Lady Julia? I am very grateful. Julia replied with her face flushed as if she had thought so too. Unlike the documents exchanged, she had been surprised that he could not have a national marriage right now. However, it was delayed by the plan that was prepared to be overly perfect. And the apology for this was to go back to the Empire and check the documents again, and later point out the young king's mistake. Okay, then, we better arrange our men in the houses of the noblemen who follow the princess as planned and wait for the right time. Of course, I didn't think of 10,000 people, but I have prepared enough, so I don't think it's too much. There are 10,000 of us, so we'll have to go around by dividing that number. It'll take a long time to get them together. It may take months. Vika also spoke with a look of satisfaction. Yes, it will cost a little more than I thought, but it will not be a bad wait. It was a plan to secretly wait for the soldiers not to be seen by the crown prince in the houses of noblemen and finally attack the imperial castle at the right time. The great dream of deposing the crown prince who had insulted her and intercepted her power finally came, and Julia spoke, unable to hide her excitement. Thank you, Marquis, for preparing so many men, and I think we should hurry back. She had no time to waste, and she had to hurry back and greet the soldiers, and then it would cost her a little less, for all the expenses was paid by Julia and other noblemen. The number of soldiers would increase, and the cost would be more than expected. So, as she said, the unexpected figure agreed with Julia. I'll come with you. What? At the sudden words of the Marquis of Renard, Lohan's eyes widened because it was not in the plan. Julia also rolled her eyes to the story she had never heard. Marquis, do you feel senile? The Marquis of Renard, who gave an unpleasant look at Lohan, as he blamed it on his age, said, Your Majesty, I have told you so many times that I have been looking for someone, so I will go to the Empire and find her. The Marquis would go himself? To the Empire? You didn't like the Empire, and did you say you didn't want to go again? Yes, I did, but unfortunately I can't afford to wait. My son's misbehavior suddenly gets worse and my wife is very worried. So I'm going to send off some people and find her myself. The look on Marquis Renard's face was full of concern, and that was why he had not yet passed on his title to his son. Lohan, who knew all about it, clicked his tongue and said, I can't help it. I am afraid to send the Marquis to the Empire, but I can't stop you, considering your son. Then I shall leave with the party of the princess. Do it. The mood was so grim that it was hard to ask for details. Julia, who had come to accompany the Marquis without knowing the reason, fell into thought as she drank tea, and only Lyra sipped her tea and then spoke carefully in the atmosphere that she was about to return to the Empire. Well. Your Majesty Lohan, may I ask you a favor? She dared to sit at a table as a maid, but she opened her mouth first. Besides, this was not the first time but the second time. Nevertheless, instead of pointing it out differently, he made a gesture that allowed her to speak, and Lyra, who was confident in it, opened her mouth with her eyes shining. I want to stay here, not go back to the Empire. Yes? Why? There's a little more information I haven't told you yet. It was dangerous to return to the Empire now, for she had fled her house that she was currently being held at, and the investigation about the hallucinogen had not been completed. So it was better to sell a little more information about the Crown Prince and build up her position than to go back and get caught. The corners of Lohan's mouth went up at the words that she would continue to sell her country. Oh, yes, I am welcome. The more information about the Empire, the better, but I need the permission from Lady Julia. I should leave her, for my maid likes it. Julia had no reason to refuse, and she was going to leave her anyway. Julia had no trouble leaving her, as Lyra said that she would remain here by herself. If she didn't threaten with the letters, whether she survived or killed, it was Lyra's fault. Then it's a decision, and I'll look forward to your information. Lohan's eyes were very sharp, but Lyra smiled brightly at the thought of living. The Marquis, why don't you take the same carriage as me? I will explain it briefly, as you may not know the situation of the Empire yet. Chapter 193. Vika suddenly spoke to the Marquis of Renard. The Marquis had not been interested in the situation of the Empire, but he affirmed that he would do so because he realized that what he really wanted to say was something else in his expression. Lyra's residence was thus decided, and Julia, Vika, and the Marquis of Renard headed for the Empire with the soldiers disguised as commoners. I can't believe Lyra really escaped. What are you going to do now? Celine had told him it was absurd. Celine knew that Lyra was going to escape because she had heard that from Asher, but she had a laugh as Lyra was so foolish that she had escaped. I ordered him to give some advice, but the princess who prepared it is also foolish. Celine had heard from Asher and had vacated the house's servants to make it easier for her to escape. The guards had been told by the top line, so they had let a slightly suspicious maid come in without checking the maid further. She didn't need to ask for the source of the information. Layers Vika, it must be him. As a key figure in the aristocratic party, he had made a great contribution to the acquisition of the casino by Viscount Vig, and he was a spy planted by Asher in the aristocratic party. She remembered that even Count Vermont had received some advice from him. He maintained their trust by constantly giving information and advice to the aristocratic party so that his identity could not be revealed. In the past, Celine had not known it until she had died, but she had now seen Vika in Asher's group with her very own eyes. If she looked back at his movements a little, she could know it easily. As Vika was active within the aristocratic party, Asher also did not add any other explanation, as he thought Celine would have understood it. Would it be better to follow her up and bring another charge for her escape? If she runs off to Croa and disappears, we might not be able to catch her. Asher shook his head when she asked, and unlike her urgent expression, Asher looked relaxed and a slight smile showed that he had already set another trap. No, we don't have to, because she can't run anywhere, and it would be better if she and the princess are to be charged with treason. If you intend to forgive her, you may as well pursue her immediately. Treason? Is Julia, who will marry the King of Croa, preparing for treason? Her eyes widened because of the unexpected information. Yes, the princess will do something very absurd soon, and it is the last thing we have worked for a long time, and I hope you will not be surprised. She thought it would be an amazing work if he asked her this much. What the hell is that? When she asked him as she was curious, Asher said that it was a secret, and he had a very pleasant face because he was in front of the hill to conquer. It was also a playful face. My God, are you still going to keep a secret from me? However, when Celine took it seriously and looked sad, he quickly changed his expression and said, "Oh, I didn't mean to make you feel bad, but I'll explain everything, and I hope you'll relax." I knew you would, and I want you to explain it. But Celine was the same as she was playing, so she also smiled softly. She erased her look of sadness in an instant. She still thought he was cute to not figure out who she was and to have a mixed sensation of joy and depression for her every expression. I was deceived by you for a moment. Asher, who thought she was really sorry for him, was embarrassed for a moment, and then he smiled softly along with her. The princess will be back in the empire with the soldiers in secret, pretending to be civilians. A great number of soldiers will be scattered in the houses of the nobles of the aristocratic party and prepare for the day of the battle. At Asher's leisurely answer, Celine's complexion became pale. If he was telling the truth, it would be a great incident. It was not a parable but a rebellion. But there is another story here. There is a secret that I have an unexpected acquaintance with a key figure. An unexpected acquaintance? Yes, it's an unexpected acquaintance that the princess would never have imagined. Asher's expression was almost confident. He was confident it was a fight that he would never lose. The end of this fight seemed to be the defeat of the princess and the destruction of the aristocratic party. As Asher said, Julia, who had left for the kingdom of Croa, returned to the empire shortly after. Unlike information that she would marry the king of Croa, there was no rumor about it. It seemed that she had come back without accomplishing anything. Celine heard that the princess had not achieved anything, and she laughed at the foolish Julia, who did not even know she was falling. The princess had persuaded all the nobles of the aristocratic party and pretended to do great things, but eventually, she did nothing. It's been a while, but Lyra hasn't come back. I thought she would be with the princess. I'm afraid something happened to her. Celine said in the quiet dining room, and her words were clearly meant for Darian. It was a question whether he was glad because he let her go. Nevertheless, Darian quietly had his meal. The countess, who did not like it, replied in a scornful tone. I'm worried that if she keeps running like this, it will produce irreparable results later. It would be okay if she will never return in the empire for the rest of her life. Celine smiled unknowingly in the tone that her mother seemed not to worry at all, and Darian looked at her. If it was the past when she had not had anything yet, she would have endured a desperate laugh, but not now. Celine had enough power and wealth to laugh at Darian. It was the countess who had contributed to this, for she was smuggling the count's family's money in secret. Darian was busy with the business on behalf of the count. Of course, it was done with the permission of the count, who was incapable and was fully dependent on the countess. It meant that neither of them had ever made a thing to be blamed. Darian had no idea how much of his fortune he had left, but he was doing the business with all his might. However, all this was incurred by himself. I'm busy, and I'll get up first. He rose first, leaving a meal that he could not empty half of it, as if he was uncomfortable and felt this place was not for him. Oh, my God, are you that busy? Yes. I hope our father will recover as soon as possible. Is that right, Mother? I suppose so. Darian, who was a bit hesitant, disappeared like the wind as she reminded him of his and Lyra's faults until the end. Why did you make work for yourself? Did the business the count had worked for decades seem so easy? It is so hard that I invest in it, but what can he do when he has graduated from the academy and became an adult? In addition, he would not be able to concentrate on his business, but he had to take care of the soldiers, who had begun to enter the empire one after another with Julia. Sooner or later, a large army would be coming into the mansion of Count Vermont, and would Darian manage the soldiers who had the King of Croa on their backs? I see the acting count. Welcome, gentlemen. Soon after, dozens of men dressed as simple as ordinary commoners came to the mansion of Count Vermont. They took a courtesy to Darian, but it was Celine who they were wary of. It was because of the scandal with the crown prince. Perhaps they had been ordered by the higher-ups. They looked so gentle, and in many ways, they seemed to be aware of her in their manners and postures. Sometimes they looked stupid as they were charmed with her beautiful appearance, but soon they realized what she was and were wary of her again and were sparing of themselves. However, the soldiers in the other mansions, who had arrived before them, demanded too much and did not listen to them, and the nobles were devoured by anxiety. Chapter 194. How could the nobles tell them their complaints? They were great soldiers sent by the king of Croa, and they had to preserve their spirit until the day of the battle and make the cause successful. So everyone endured everything. I cannot give preference to the family of Count Vermont. No, Celine hoped that if possible, they would be very annoying to the servants in the mansion and that all the resentment would be directed at Darien and Lyra. For that reason, Celine went first to the soldiers who had been in a quiet state for several days. All of you have a hard time. Lady Celine. Suddenly, Celine appeared in the garden while they were resting, and they were surprised and took a courtesy. It was surprising that a noblewoman came to visit, especially Celine, who was the crown prince's lover. Also, she was the investor A of the rumors. They had not been instructed not to go on a rampage at the mansion of Count Vermont, but they wouldn't dare do that in a mansion where Celine of brilliant modifiers was. Celine, who read their innocent look, noticed that there was no one around her and told them. I don't feel comfortable because you're uncomfortable. The faces of the soldiers were embarrassed by her surprising talk. Why don't you understand it all at once? Celine continued to talk. I hope you have a comfortable stay in the mansion. Everything will be accounted for by my brother, the acting count. He is very generous. Ah. Of course, the owner of this mansion is not me and my mother, so I cannot take responsibility. I will leave this house as I reach adulthood. It's Darien who called you in the first place, so please don't mind me. Several times she mentioned that Darien was responsible for what the soldiers would do, and then they opened their eyes as if they understood what Celine meant. I heard that the soldiers who stay in different mansions enjoy a banquet every night. What about you? The mansion of Count Vermont is full of alcohol and food enough to hold a banquet right away. Celine smiled softly and recommended. The way she said that was also languid, but it was close to the command to do so. The soldiers, briefly charmed by her beautiful smile, began to wake up and burst into the demands they had endured. How frustrating it must have been. They must have come to play, eat, and get drunk. There was nothing to block them as Celine's permission fell. They began to make more demanding and annoying demands than the soldiers in any mansion. Get more food. Meat. Bring meat. Where is this drink from? It doesn't taste good. Bring us the highest grade one. Since their aim was to devastate the wealth of the nobility, the soldiers demanded the most expensive food, clothing, and blankets. As they were the soldiers sent by the king of Croa, Darien suffered without saying that he didn't like it. Even if the count was fine, he could cope with whatever would happen, but he did not have the knowledge that he was able to overpower the tough soldiers. There was no action, and shortly afterward, the lament of servants began. Every day the sad song continued. Celine, who had brought it all, held a simple tea party in the garden for the servants in the meantime, and they began to confess as if they had waited. It's so hard to get new food every time. They eat a lot of food. They said they were acquaintances of Darien, but I'm not sure. They don't look like noblemen. The way they talk is also strange. Is it a mix of dialects? Right. It's a bit rough. It's strange for 3 or 4 people to use one room. Well, some people sleep with a blanket on the floor. Furthermore, they demand us thick and soft clean blankets every time, so I'm doing laundry every day and lost an inch off my waist. I have swollen hands. They are freezing, and I can't clench my fists. When the servant said her hand was swollen, Celine furrowed her forehead. She seemed to wash clothes from dawn to lunch even though the winter was approaching, and the days were cold. There were a lot of people, and it was inevitable. I feel very sorry for you. You look really sick as your hands are swollen. Her short words with all her heart reddened the eyes of the servants. Even though it was not so much comfort, they felt comforted by Celine's sorrowful voice. Besides, it was Darien who had brought hardship to them, but Celine was comforting them. So how could they not be impressed? Celine suggested a solution for the servants, who were about to cry. You don't have to push yourself too much in doing laundry. Buy a new one every time they ask for a blanket. Yes. I am thankful to you, but there are too many. I don't know how long they will stay in the mansion, but it will definitely cost too much. There was a terrible rumor that Darian did not manage the Count's business properly and the Count's family was going bankrupt, so they needed to save as much as possible. Many a little would make a mickle. No, it wasn't a little because the winter came and the price of the blanket was not cheap. If it was a cheap quilt, it would be okay, but they had to buy a high-quality quilt, and the number of soldiers was quite large. It was clear that a lot of money would continue to be spent. Not only the food cost, but also the clothing and entertainment was a big expense, and the wealth of the Count's family was greatly damaged. That was exactly what Asher wanted and what Celine was hoping for as well, so she gently grabbed the cold hands of a servant. What is as important as your body and mind? And don't worry, since the family of Count Vermont, which is the wealthiest in the empire, can't be swayed with such a penny. Rumor is just a rumor. Oh, miss. How kind you are. You can buy a lot of food and keep it. If it's bad and you have to throw it away, you can't help it. Order a lot at a time and ask them to deliver it to the mansion even if you pay extra. Well, can we really do that? Of course. I'll take responsibility if anything happens. Celine made a gentle smile as they were touched. It was that faux ability that drove away the real owners of the mansion of Count Vermont and held the dominion of the mansion. If you're short on stuff, go to this store. It always seemed to bring a bunch of fresh stuff. If not, they'll get it and deliver it to the mansion. Celine passed the address to the servants, which she had prepared in advance. It was one of her businesses. As it boasted high-quality ingredients, the price was also expensive. As they bought groceries with the funds of the Count's family, the profits from this were distributed and returned to Celine. Those who did not know this were deeply impressed by Celine's great consideration and swore allegiance to her again. After arriving in the empire, the Marquis of Renard had already visited a number of brothels to find a woman who his son longed for. It was not easy to find a person with a name and approximate appearance that was supposed to be an alias. If she were a commoner, it would be easy, but as she was a prostitute, it was not easy to follow her tracks. In the wagon leaving the last brothel, the Marquis of Renard recalled the unexpected words that he had heard when they were headed to the Empire. Those words were what he had heard from Vika. His Highness wanted to meet the Marquis of Renard, but he would eventually meet you this way. Where is His Highness? The Crown Prince. The last time he visited Croa, he asked several times that he would like to visit your mansion as there was something he wanted to check. That reminded him of a man who had asked for a visit so much that the Marquis of Renard became tired. He had called himself the Crown Prince of the Empire, but he remembered that he had gone out and did not meet him. But he was really the Crown Prince. Come to think of it, there had been a time when the Crown Prince had visited Croa with Vermont's Celine, his lover. Chapter 195. However, it had been his mistake as he had come to meet at first without making an appointment. So the Marquis had lightly passed it over, and when he thought about it again, he felt that the Crown Prince of the Empire would not come to see him in a simple matter, so he listened to Vika. His Highness said he wanted to confirm something. What is it? It's about your son. My son? Does it mean Chloe? Even recently, Chloe had caused trouble and her wife had been lying down. When he remembered it and frowned, Vika continued to talk, clearing his throat. Yes. There is a lady in the Empire that looks exactly like your son. I can't guarantee that I can only confirm it with a portrait, but it's very similar to the face painted on that portrait anyway. What do you mean? You should check her face once, but His Highness said, didn't his son have his descendant right in the Empire? At the words, the Marquis of Renard frowned even more. Chloe? Did he get his offspring in the Empire? What a ridiculous nonsense. Why can't I hand my title to him? Thinking again, even though he knew it sounded ridiculous, he couldn't help but recall the name that Vika had mentioned. It was because nothing more could be done for his son. I didn't say Chloe was my son in the first place. What does the Crown Prince know? He had been surprised at a moment and exchanged a few words, but in the end, it had sounded ridiculous and he had finished the conversation. How did he know about Chloe and claim that he had a child? Nevertheless, his mouth tickled because he wanted to turn the carriage. He kept thinking about Vika's words that there was nothing to lose with his confirmation. If he only confirmed as he said, it was not a loss. He didn't think it was possible, but if the lady was Chloe's child, as Vika had said, the woman his son had missed so much would be there with the lady. And if it was true, she would be his granddaughter. Is it better to turn the wagon too? Looking out the window, the carriage was already approaching his quarters. He felt the speed slowing. Of course, if it stopped, it was reversible, but he was impatient. Isn't that the King Lohan told everything to the Crown Prince? It was possible. For convenience, he had told Lohan about his private matter. Nothing was as insignificant as to doubt his lord, but it wasn't Lohan, but the previous king of Croa, who had promised to keep the secrets of Chloe and Violet. Therefore, he was not in a position to regret if Lohan had spoken the secret. Of course, he was not so easy to uncover his secret, but it was one of the possibilities. We're here. While so worried about his complex feelings, the carriage stopped and the voice of the driver was heard from the outside. The driver had been employed directly in the Empire, but now it was a somewhat familiar voice. He was hired for a short period of time without revealing his identity, but the driver was a competent person who responded intimately without compromising his status and force in the Marquis of Renard. Even if it wasn't the report of the driver, the Marquis could see that he had arrived in a view out of the window, but could not get off. We're here. When he had no answer and no signs, the driver again announced the arrival. After sitting for a while, he decided that it would be a good idea to check it. I'm sorry, but there's a place to go. Yes. Please speak. As the driver replied casually, the Marquis of Renard hesitated a bit and then told the destination. Go to the mansion of Count Layers. Yes, sir. The Marquis's instruction made a busy footstep, and the carriage soon set off for a new destination. Mr. Vika. Mr. Renard came to see you. What should I do? Renard. The Marquis of Renard? He was just waiting for him, so Vika was pleased and ordered his servant to let him come in. He had informed the Crown Prince that the Marquis had secretly visited the Empire, and he had been urged to confirm the truth. The Crown Prince had had an urgent face. I confirmed it through the portrait, but I want to make sure through blood. If it turns out to be true, I wonder how those who have ignored her will change. Vika, who recalled the words of the Crown Prince, was also curious about the changes of others. Even though she had great ability, they still neglected her as they mentioned about her origin. It wasn't just that he was fond of Celine and wanted them to regret and change their attitude. He simply wanted to consume the dual attitude of the nobility as entertainment. The daughter of a vulgar prostitute was found out that she was the blood of the Marquis family. Is there anything more interesting than this? Soon afterward, Vika greeted the Marquis with a very happy face, who was coming into his mansion. I haven't seen you in a long time, Marquis Renard. Did you find her? Knowing that the Marquis came to him because he couldn't find her, Vika archly greeted the Marquis. It was similar to a scorn that he should have listened to him seriously from the beginning. It was the Marquis that was a little uncomfortable, but he answered without saying a complaint as he himself was sorry. No, unfortunately, I didn't find her. So I came to you. Wasn't the conversation we talked about quite interesting? Even after looking for her in the capital for a long time, he could not find the shadow of the woman Chloe had been looking for, and he hurried to the point. Vika also wanted to make a satisfactory report to the Crown Prince, so he no longer found fault with his remark and answered straight away. Would you like to go check her face? If possible, right now. Good. It's easy. It's a matter of saying that I come to see the Count who is lying down. And meanwhile, it meant checking her face. It was the least cumbersome and easy way to check her face. He didn't know if the Marquis had a good idea, but the Marquis's face brightened a little. We'd better leave right now. Before the sun goes down. I will. Both Vika and the Marquis were in a hurry, so they didn't delay and went straight to the mansion of Count Vermont. There was nothing good to move separately, so the Marquis returned his carriage to the lodge and accompanied him in Vika's carriage. Not too far, but the road seemed to be far away. As a result, the Marquis was nervous and his lips were dry, and he could not say anything. So quietly and quickly, they reached the mansion of Count Vermont, and Darien, busy with his business, had not yet returned home. The mansion was rather noisy because of the soldiers from Croa, and the Countess welcomed them in an elegant manner. "What brings you here?" "I was anxious about the Count." "I'm sorry for the late time." "No. By the way, who is this?" "Oh, he is my acquaintance from far away. We visited together because he had been favored by the Count in the past." "Oh, really? My husband seems to have piled virtue in many ways." "Nice to meet you." The Countess greeted the Marquis of Renard with a bright smile and a courtesy. "He may not remember me because it was very gracious for a moment, but I've been worried and visit. Forgive my rudeness." "It's not rude. He can't move freely, so he just waits for someone to visit." The Marquis glanced over the face of the Countess in detail, as she answered. Blonde hair, green eyes, and a beauty. She was consistent with the appearance his son had always had in his mouth. It had been difficult for Chloe to identify exactly because he had no talent for painting, but the rumor was that she was a former prostitute. It was quite possible that she was the woman Chloe had been looking for. "He is in the room. Unfortunately, his legs don't move at all, so he can't come out. How poor he is." To explain her husband's unfortunate condition, the Countess, who had spoken out a rather unscrupulous sentiment as if talking about someone else's, led Vika and the Marquis to the Count's room. There, Vika and the Marquis, who saw the state of the Count in bed, swallowed a shocked breath. Chapter 196. Count. Long time no see. Yes. Long time no see, Vika. How are you? Of course. Vika couldn't ask the Count how he was, and he finished with a smile. The Count nodded to the Marquis beside him and asked him who he was. "Ah, he was a little helped by Count the other day." "It's Pia. I've been grateful to you the other day." "I see. I'm sorry I can't remember you." "No. You can do that. There were a lot of rumors that you were doing great grace to the poor." "Haha. Was it? I would be very happy if it was." The look of the Count who replied was so bright. For he could no longer serve as active, but simply mentioning the glory of the past could have made him a great favor, despite having never met. This allowed Vika and the Marquis to have a long conversation with the Count. They delayed the time as long as possible and waited for Celine, but she didn't come out of her room. "Oh, time is already here. It's already dinner time." And the Countess, bored by their visit, gave a secret order to leave to the Marquis and Vika. But the Count did not want them to leave, so he offered them dinner so that they could stay at the mansion for a little more. "Have you had dinner?" "No, not yet." Vika bit the bait, wondering if Celine would show up at the dining room, and the Countess gave an uncomfortable look and ordered servants to prepare dinner for the two of them. It was not difficult to add a meal for two people because the ingredients were well prepared. So Vika and the Marquis could sit in the dining room with the Countess and waited with a throbbing heart for Celine to come down. Soon after, the figure they were waiting for appeared in the dining room. "We had a guest." The Marquis, who turned his head in a clear, transparent voice, had to be hardened as if time had stopped, and Vika's eyes sparkled and he smiled as he was watching it. "You are Mr. Vika, right? It's been a long time, Lady Celine." "Yes, what brings you here?" "I came to ask after the health of the Count." As Vika replied, and Celine's face was mistrustful, knowing that Vika was not a pure-minded man, and that he was not in a position to worry about the Count. Vika, who spoke vaguely with a laugh and pretended to be the owner of the house, talked to her to take a seat. "The food will cool. When it cools, it will taste bad." "Okay, I've never seen this gentleman before." This time Celine's eyes turned to the Marquis. The familiar clear green eyes. If the strangers saw her, they might think her eyes resembled the Countess, but not to the Marquis, and those clear, beautiful eyes were certainly close to the eyes of Chloe. It was hard to notice because the colors were different, but it certainly was. So were the pupils, and the overall appearance was the same as Chloe's. Someone, who knew their faces of Chloe and her, would never have thought of other people, and if she cut her hair short, she would be Chloe. So when the Marquis was captivated and could not answer as she asked, Vika replied on her behalf. Ah, he had an acquaintance with the Count a little, and he came to say hello and then he joined the dinner. Is that so? He is rather a quiet person. As she said so, her eyes were very sharp, glancing the Marquis, because she did not believe Vika's words. She seemed to think he had a secret design, and even the look on her face looked like Chloe's. He had not come to look for Celine, but to find her mother, and when he met her, he did not give any interest to the Countess. The Marquis's eyes were only on Celine. You are very rude. And even though Celine pointed that out, he was moved rather than offended or apologetic. How couldn't he be impressed by his own flesh and blood that he met in a foreign country? You are beautiful, and he can't help it. Vika made a hasty excuse for the Marquis, who could not even say a word of apology, but the Marquis's rude gaze was never taken away. If she had felt the carnal desire in his eyes, she might have splashed water, but he was shocked and surprised, not by the lust for the opposite sex, and Celine began to eat as if she had given up. The Marquis seemed to have a lot of questions to ask her, but he could not speak to her until she had finished her meal. Mr. Asterope. Mr. Asterope. Asher answered, frowning at Vika, who had come to him frivolously this late night. Why? You don't have to answer that as if you're being so annoying. Why? There were some things that bothered him to answer, but it was a bigger reason why he was nervous about not being able to meet Celine because he was busy in the last work. Could you see who I brought? Who is that? Asher spoke with a surprised face. Did Lady Celine visit me this late at night? It seemed a little less in the past, but lately, everything concluded to Celine, and Vika answered with a little irritation. No, it's not. Do you say so, knowing how busy Lady Celine is? He is not as good as Lady Celine, but he is the one who you have waited for. Before he could get angry at the convulsive words of Vika, someone opened the door to the office and came in, even though he had not yet allowed it. He was a stranger with white hair and close to an old man. Who is it? I see your highness, my name is Renard from Croa. Asher's eyes widened at the Marquis's introduction. If he was the Marquis of Renard, he was the man who he had been waiting for, as much as Celine. And this was how he came to. I guess you finished confirming. As he said it, his eyes were shining, because he could see the results without listening. Your Highness, how and what did you know? As the Marquis of Renard asked directly, Asher recommended him to move to another place. I think we should move over, and that's not the story of standing up and talking. Yes. Vika called a servant quickly and ordered him to bring tea out. The servant had been waiting since he had appeared near the office, and 2 cups of tea were ready, and Asher and the Marquis of Renard moved to the lounge, which was prepared in the next room of the office. I was not the first to know. It was Fry. If it was Fry. Fry, Violet's eldest daughter. Although she had been separated since Chloe and Violet had been deported, it was possible for her to recognize Celine at a glance because she had stayed with Chloe for a long time. Yes, Franz Fry, you know her well. How is she? She seems to be well. It wouldn't be too bad to go and see her. How could I, who had taken all of her family away from her? Of course, it was the imperial royal family that had taken Violet first, but as a result, Fry had been left alone in the empire, so he could not go to see her proudly. And she was not his own blood. Thank you. So, he didn't look grateful but rather wanted to talk about something else. Asher, who noticed this, did not waste time, but immediately came to the point. Anyway, that's why I investigated about Chloe. I remembered seeing his face when I was a little child. The more I investigated, the more overlapping it was with Lady Celine, and I could not help but doubt it. That's why you came to me, to confirm the truth. Yes. I couldn't think of anyone else, except you who took the mother and son who had been deported from the empire. And if a powerful man couldn't help, there would be no way I couldn't have obtained any information out of it. The reasoning was quite plausible, and this had been almost broken but connected. It was bad news that the Countess had been married, but it was much better than the past when he did not even know where she was. He could even find the presence of Celine. Asher asked the Marquis, who drank tea with a trembling hand with joy. Did Chloe not know about Celine? Chapter 197. Yes, he doesn't know anything about her because the secret of his birth was revealed and deported as soon as he met a woman named Apple. Apple? It was the name of the Countess Vermont, and it's a common alias to a prostitute. It was a strange sense, but in the empire where flowers symbolized the aristocratic family, it was common to use things other than flowers as an alias. Apple was a fruit that was easy to see, so half a dozen of them were using it, and that was why it was not easy to find her whereabouts. It was only one meeting, but he still misses her. Why didn't you just let people ask around? No matter how deported they were, it was possible because the Marquis had taken them. When Chloe was deported, he was insane. He couldn't talk for a while. He knew that he wasn't his father who he's ever believed in, but he couldn't have been all right. Even now. No, I sent people to find her later, but I couldn't find her. So you've come here yourself, because Chloe's in bad condition. Yes, you are right. But he had met Celine and Asher, who noticed that his purpose had changed. Anyone could know that if they saw his expression of joy. He was purely touched by the presence of Celine and his encounter with her. Now it's time to go back. I hope both Chloe and Violet are happy. Are you thinking about just going back? Just? What do you mean? The Countess married the Count and would no longer be able to be with Chloe, and Lady Celine would not follow the Marquis because she had settled in the Empire. You just checked that she was your descent, and I ask you if you'll just go back. That was the most desirable result for Asher. If Celine would follow the Marquis and go to Croa, it would be harder to meet her. As the distance was too far, there was a limit to use his ability. There was a maxim, out of sight, out of mind. When he was worried about it and asked, the Marquis, who was a little worried, replied, "No. I just don't want to go back." Apple, no, the Countess. It is not easy to accompany me because she is married, but I think it will be different if it is Lady Celine. I have heard of her only by rumors, but it will be easier to stay in Croa than the Empire where she has been treated contemptuously so far. I also want to support everything she hasn't enjoyed. Perhaps it would be better for Celine. Most people would think of it as the Marquis. No matter how she settled in the Empire, it would be better to go to the Kingdom of Croa because it was mostly done in writing. Well, will it be as easy as it sounds? But even if all were in favor, Asher could not agree. Rumors of Celine's relationship with Asher as a lover were widespread and the Marquis was already aware of it, so he didn't question his negative response. Furthermore, the heart of Lady Celine will be important. You wouldn't be able to take her even if you want to take her. I'm aware of that. So I should ask for her opinion. Her opinion? When there was nothing at all, her blood had not showed up at all, but if he suddenly appeared and said that he came to take her after she was successful, who would be happy to accept it? In the past, Celine, who had only been a daughter of a prostitute, would have been very happy, but now they did not know her mind. And somewhere in his mind, there was also confidence that Celine would not leave him. It was clear that Celine would choose himself rather than the Marquis who suddenly appeared. And if not, he would just close the border to Croa. It would not be bad to make a law that minors could not go abroad. He knew it was a ridiculous idea, but he didn't want to let go of Celine. Isn't the power existed for this use? Regardless of how Celine responded, Asher, who thought of a way to prevent the Marquis from taking her, said to him in a lightened look. Good. Then you'd better ask her directly, as the Marquis said. Directly? Do you mean now? The Marquis asked with a surprised face whether the memory of the first encounter was so bad. If you are uncomfortable, I can ask her for it. If he asked himself, she was likely not to go. As she did not know the circumstances well, Asher would write a written promise so that she could not leave forever. It may be a good idea to carry the relationship slowly and ask later, but it is better for her to know this current state. I would be grateful if your highness would do that. You don't know it's a trap. The corners of Asher's mouth rose with a satisfactory answer. The next day, Asher, who was in a hurry, visited the mansion of Count Vermont in the morning without an appointment. He was with the Marquis, disguised with a wig. In the appearance of a brilliant carriage, soldiers taking a morning walk gathered around with a surprised face. Shortly afterward, they all lowered their heads in the shape of a tulip-shaped seal drawn on the wagon. Celine came to the entrance of the mansion late in the morning and opened her eyes and asked, "What are you doing here so early in the morning? What purpose is there other than to come to see you?" "Me? But it's too early. Besides, why did you come to ride the bright carriage? Did you want to brag about going to see me in the whole capital again? You can come straight to my room." Celine shook her head and asked if he would like to have breakfast with her. "Why don't you have breakfast with me outside?" "Outside? Only two of us. Not a quiet dinner, but breakfast?" It was a strange invitation, but her heart was moved, so Celine smiled and nodded. "I have to change my clothes. I'll wait." It would take some time because she had to trim her hair, but Celine's mind was urgent, at the answer that he didn't care. Celine disappeared back into the mansion so quickly and began to dress up. "Miss. How about this dress? This necklace is good for you. Do you want to spray gold on your hair? Oh my God, I have to shine your nails." It was not only Celine that was busy. The maids were also busy with the sudden visit of the crown prince, and the countess, who was about to eat breakfast, also helped her daughter dress up in a fuss. "Would I bring my jewels for you? This new diamond is very beautiful." In the end, Celine had to wave her hand at the seemingly excessive appearance. "Please don't forget that it is now morning. I'm going to have breakfast, not a party." Otherwise, she was gorgeous, but she was so beautiful that it was hard to look at her because it was snowy when she was dressed with all their care. Is there someone who decorates so gorgeously in the morning? Even though she was a noble, she had to classify time and place. Then Celine smiled happily as they took off the things that had been decorated. "If you come out with such a beautiful dress, I can't get you off the carriage. I don't know what to do with so much compliment." In the end, all the ornaments were collected and she did not decorate herself so splendidly, but it could not prevent his mouth from drawing a good line. The wagon carrying Celine immediately left the mansion of the Count and ran the city. The people who faced the bright carriage from the morning could not hide their surprised faces for a while, but after realizing that this had happened several times, they shook their heads, saying that the crown prince fell in love. "By the way, why did you come? Did you really want to have breakfast together?" "Of course." Apart from asking questions, it was true that he wanted to have breakfast with her, so Asher replied casually. "Really?" "Yes. I haven't seen you for a while and couldn't sleep at night. So I visited early this morning." This was not a lie either. When he had closed his eyes, he had almost moved to the space as Celine had come to his mind. Whether she liked his answer, doubt disappeared from the face of Celine, and bright laughter blossomed. Chapter 198. As it was so beautiful, Asher was almost speechless. In fact, he had visited for another reason, but he also smiled thinking that it had been good to come. "Well, this is a pretty wild question. How would you feel if your biological father suddenly appeared to you and wanted to take you?" Asher's voice flowed over the wall of the wagon and into the driver's seat. It was because they picked a wagon with a thin wall. The Marquis swallowed his saliva and waited for Celine's answer, and Celine cocked her head, and asked back, "I don't know why you're asking such a question without saying anything. It wasn't long before you would become an adult, and I suddenly thought about it. What if your biological father appears and you disappear after a while? What if you run away saying you don't like me? Should I block the border?" As if acting, he put his hand on his chin and replied with a worried face, and Celine burst into small laughs. "It's that kind of anxiety. I have dreamed of you running away many times." Celine, who had achieved many things by herself, was able to live proudly without marrying the crown prince. He might be comfortable if she had no abilities and had to lean on him. But that wouldn't happen, and Asher did not want it, so he gave up a long time ago. I do not know. If he shows up now, I will doubt his true intentions. What do you mean? When I was in a difficult time, he didn't even cast a shadow, but does it mean that he appears as I am self-reliant enough to live alone? It doesn't look good. And in the past, her biological father, who hadn't appeared in the middle of the 20 and died, suddenly appeared now. She really had to doubt his true heart. I see. What if he didn't show up for some reason and didn't mind if there was nothing in you? Suddenly, his explanation changed quite a bit, and Celine, who rolled her eyes for a while, shook her head again. It depends, but... Well, I will refuse. Why? Because you'd hate it. How can I be positive if you tell me that you've been thinking about it first? In addition, it was Asher who would live with her in the future, not her biological father who had no contact at all. And it was also Asher who had always comforted her. Now when he said that he was her father and would take her, she would not be impressed. The carriage was once rattled by her answer, which gave no room. It wasn't too much, but it was clearly a shake that obviously represented the Marquis's mind. Unfortunately, she did not take the wishes of the Marquis. Asher's expression was so bright as he said so. Even though it was not the face of the one who argued the misfortune of others, the Marquis of Renard agreed with it. Yes. Thank you for your help. After hearing Celine's intentions, the Marquis of Renard would no longer say he would take her. In a satisfactory result, Asher asked him what he would do in the future. What are you going to do in the future? You missed both the Countess and Celine. For now. I'll talk to the Countess. No matter how much Lady Celine hates us, the blood relation is a different matter. That's a good idea, and it's better than suddenly confusing Lady Celine. Yes, I think it would be better to hear it from the Countess than from me. He could not take her to the kingdom of Croa anyway, so it was better to take time to reveal it slowly than to confess that she was the descendant of the Marquis family. Either way, she would be shocked, but it would be better to hear from her mother who had been with her than her strange grandfather. I'm sorry, but can you help me one more time? If it's simple. What's it for? Could you make a seat with the Countess for me? It's hard to visit her again because I visited the mansion of the Count family as a different person. It's not that hard. Okay. Asher gave consent to the request of the Marquis. He got to know what he had hoped for, and there was nothing he couldn't help. Besides, there was another reason why Asher accepted the request of the Marquis. He intended to be present at the conversation between the Countess and the Marquis. The meeting with the Countess was done without delay. When he wrote a letter to her that there was a problem to the villa she had purchased, she appeared at the appointed place with a desperate expression. Your Highness. I haven't seen you in a long time, madam, please sit down. Apparently, it was a letter from the government office, and why was the Crown Prince here? Come to think of it for a while, and it was strange that the meeting place was a cafe in the first place. If there was a problem, they would have told her to come to the office. It was a room that was independent of other places, but it was not a suitable place to deal with public affairs. The Countess, who had confirmed that the man who had visited the house the previous time with the Crown Prince, sat on the other side of them, her eyes shaking. I ordered tea at my will, but I don't know if you'll like it. It's okay. Thank you. The Countess took a sip of the fragrant jasmine tea with her trembling hands and calmed down her heart. She wondered what he was going to say, and why he had been fooling the letter. As she waited for Asher to speak, worried, and it was the Marquis of Renard who unexpectedly spoke. I actually called you. Why? I want to ask you something. Why did he call her in, who had been in a small grace by the Count? She couldn't form any idea of what it was, and she swallowed her saliva and waited for an answer. However, the words from his mouth were unexpected. Do you know Chloe? Who? Chloe. He said he saw you only once, 17 years ago. I'm talking about my son, who looks like Lady Celine. At his words, the Countess frowned and rolled her eyes, and she seemed to be worried because she could not think of who it was. How could she think of a man who she had met only once more than 10 years ago? And 17 years ago, it was the time when she had been working as a prostitute. A man she'd met when she didn't want to think about. Don't tell me, are you talking about the man? Nevertheless, he had an unforgettable appearance, and she opened her eyes wide as if she had come to think of his face, and asked back. She had forgotten him, but she could remember that he looked like Celine. Why do you ask that? I just met him a long time ago once. She had met him as a guest. She would not even remember him if he was not like Celine. Her heart had been moved by his sweet talk, and he had said that he was attracted to her at first sight with his beautiful appearance, that she could not believe he was a man. He had never given her his name or his status, but she had thought that such a sweet man could make her happy. But Chloe had not come since his single visit, and it had frozen the heart of the Countess, who had expected for a moment. Why did he ask about such a man now? She thought of it and looked displeased again, and suddenly she had a strange feeling. She had thought of the man she had met more than a decade ago through her daughter, and she was also suspicious of the timing. She had had Celine shortly after she'd met Chloe. The Countess, embarrassed, trembled her hands, unable to hide her face, and the tea water, which had spilled over her mouth before she could bring it to her mouth, soaked her beautiful dress a little. She needed time to think and organize, and the Marquis of Renard and Asher watched her and waited quietly. And the Countess, who had been in a long-suffering mood, looked at the Marquis with a sharp, thoughtful expression as if she had sorted out. So, do you come to threaten me with a pretext of my daughter? Do you need money? Otherwise, the man who had visited to ask after his health with the slight grace of the Count would not come to her like this. Chapter 199. It was strange that the Crown Prince was beside him, but as she could only think of it, she revealed her hostility, and then Asher, who was still, intervened in the conversation. Madam, please be a little angry. This is the Marquis of Renard of the Kingdom of Croa. Sorry for the late introduction. Who? When Asher introduced him again as the Marquis of Renard, the Countess did not move. It was as if she had stopped breathing. The man you met, Chloe, is my eldest son, and I think you have guessed to some extent, but I was wondering if the blood had been linked to Lady Celine. I don't think she looks like him unless it does. So, Celine succeeds the blood of the Marquis family? I think so. The Countess's eyes wandered in disbelief, and she seemed to be embarrassed at the thought of how to take it, for it was not bad, but it was something she had never thought of. There had been several lower-class noblemen who had visited her, and she had thought that it might be possible, but she had never thought that he was a man of the Marquis family. My son was in trouble, and he couldn't come to see you, but he still misses you. He'll be delighted to hear that he has a daughter. Wait, give me a moment to think. It's so sudden, and I don't know what to say. Besides, it's not certain, but you just came because she looked like. The Countess put down her teacup because of what the Marquis said. His beautiful appearance was uncommon, but it was difficult to confirm that because of her previous job. Don't worry about that, ma'am, I have a way to check it out. At his words, the Countess and the Marquis looked at Asher at the same time. How could he confirm if the name was not written on the blood? Then the Marquis opened his eyes wide as if he had realized something. The pond of the Imperial Castle. Yes, if Lady Celine was the granddaughter of Violet, who drank the holy water, she could touch the pond of the Imperial Castle. She didn't know what they were talking about, but the Countess nodded at the words that there was a way to check. Then, if you're sure, tell me again. As for me, I'll have to sort things out by then. The Marquis asked in an urgent voice as she finished the conversation. If you don't mind, may we send you a letter? Will you send it to me or Celine? I will send it to you. No, maybe Chloe. Chloe might want to get in touch with her, who he had been finding for a long time. He might even visit the Empire by forging his identity. The Countess rose, answering with a chilling voice. Well, it would be a misunderstanding if another man writes a letter to a woman who has already been married, and if you're done, I'll excuse you first. Yet the Marquis had a little hope for her unsure refusal, and the Marquis, who had the means to contact and some good news, left the Empire without hesitation. On the other hand, when he returned to the office, Asher was thinking, touching the ring in his hand. At the end of the day, before going to bed, Celine screamed a little at Asher, who suddenly appeared. It was fortunate that the maids were not there anymore, but she complained that he almost showed a great scene. "Why didn't you talk and come to me?" "I'm sorry." Asher's apologetic gaze passed the ring in Celine's hand and headed for the box of the hourglass box in the cabinet. As he thought that the blood of Violet flowed to Celine, he had a doubt for the box that she had always carried. "Mr. Asher?" Asher, who could not take his eyes out of the box, turned to her at her call. Then all of a sudden he told her why he visited her room. "Why don't we take a night walk?" "But it's cold, right?" As Celine's birthday was near now, it was not good to take a walk this late at night. Asher smiled softly at her question and put his coat over her shoulders. "The pond of the Imperial Castle is not very cold." "Yeah. The pond of the Imperial Castle." He suddenly talked about the story of the pond of the Imperial Castle, and she was embarrassed and was about to ask something when he grabbed her hand and used his power. Celine was lost in the picturesque landscape, which she had only heard in stories, without being surprised by the sudden change of view. "It's the pond of the Imperial Castle. This is a place I often visit because of its mystical atmosphere and soothing landscape." That's awesome." She didn't know why it looked like that. Maybe it was because it was late at night, but it was as if the stars in the sky were melting in a small pond. The flowers around it were also mysterious. As Asher said, the cold of winter could not be felt there. Because of that, her look of surprise and embarrassment vanished, but she was carried away by the ecstatic scene. Asher quietly watched her for a while and led her inside. "Well, my feet are on the grass." She thought it would be trampled, but strangely, the grass and flowers stepped on by Celine's feet did not bend or die, and they rose again. At the peculiar sight, she checked again the grass and flowers she stepped on, but they were still there. It was a strange place indeed. The water in this pond is called the Holy Water. It's because there's a legend that the pond was formed after the Emperor of the Empire died here. "Ah, so there was such a legend." Celine's eyes were dull as she answered, and the stars in the pond gleamed in her eyes. She was already completely charmed by the pond. Asher asked her what she really wanted. "Would you like to touch it?" "The pond? Can I touch it?" "Yes, there is a myth that it brings happiness." Even though Asher's permission had been granted, she hesitated, but she lost her heart at the words that it would bring happiness. So she bent over and reached out to touch the pond's water. She felt a cold sensation on her fingertips. "It's cold, I think only this pond is affected by winter." "I see." As he watched this, his eyes were shining, and Celine, who touched the water in the pond, straightened herself and came near him. "I touched the water. Will happiness come now?" Celine's face was a little flushed. She seemed to like Asher's sudden visit, and their walk in the middle of the night. Asher glanced down, saying yes. The ring on her finger was shining softly. "Mr. Asher?" Celine called Asher in a curious voice because he was not making eye contact. In time, as the light faded from the ring, Asher, who turned his eyes from her hand, met her eyes. He was now convinced after seeing Celine touch the holy water. It was not a mistake that the ring had changed its color the other day. "Is there something in my hand?" Celine, who was aware that his gaze had been in her hand, asked, lowering her gaze. She remembered he had mentioned the color of the ring the last time, and as she touched the ring, he answered as if it was nothing. "No, I thought it was a butterfly, and I think it was an illusion." "Butterfly? This winter night?" Is it because of this excuse that he looked at the butterfly in front of her? She answered that she could not believe it. Nevertheless, she seemed to be caught that she was hiding something. Asher stared at Celine, who was in disbelief and was lost in thought. On the other hand, he wanted to ask why the color of the ring had changed in the past, and what she was hiding, unlike how the color of the ring changed when she touched the holy water earlier. But if he asked it here now, he had to confess that the reason why he brought her to the pond of the Imperial Castle was because he wanted to confirm her identity. He could not ask her honestly because he had lied to her, so he could bring her to the pond. It would be best if Celine would tell what she was hiding, but since she did not seem to have any intention of doing so, it was better to wait for the right moment and ask it naturally. Chapter 200. Anyway, Celine would not go to anyone but himself, and even if she left him, he would not let her go, so he had plenty of chances to ask. So he kept his mind deep in his heart, wanting to know the truth. "You'd better go home because it's late, and you might catch a cold." He wrapped up her shoulders covered by his coat and changed the subject, pretending to be casual. In no time, his look was changed and smiled with a soft smile that he had always shown to her. "Yes." In response, Celine looked suspicious, but she was naturally beside him, convinced that there would be a reason. She was also good at hiding her facial expression, and he didn't know what she was thinking, but maybe she thought it was nothing. She then took a step forward and immediately her vision turned to her room. When he cleared his doubt, he felt a sense of regret for not wanting to part with her. As he looked down at her face, thinking of the conversation that would take a moment, he said, as if something came up. "It will all be settled soon." "Oh, I see. I thought it would be the time after a while, but already, and would Lyra show up?" Celine said, paying great attention. "Maybe so, because they think they'll win." "I hope she'll be back as soon as possible," said Celine, and her doubts about Asher had disappeared. She was delighted as if she were a kid playing a new prank. What is so fun? Is it because Lyra will be ruined? Or is it because the Count's family will be ruined? Or both? If someone knew Celine's cruel temper with a sulky smile that seemed to have a secret design, he would have been busy calming his surprised heart, but she was only a beautiful woman to Asher. "I'm afraid I'll go now. I'll see you on your birthday." "That long?" Since it wasn't that late, he took the hand of Celine, who was surprised and asked him a question. He asked Celine with a lovely smile. "Will you visit the Imperial Castle?" "That's..." As she hesitated because she was also busy, he smiled a little. "If you allow me, I will secretly visit you like this if I have the time. If I can't, I will make sure to send you a letter." "I see." It was really late, so he left regret behind and kissed Celine on the back of her hand and said goodbye, then disappeared. Soon after he disappeared, Celine, who had had a soft girl's face, looked at her hand with a cold face. The ring. The ring that had taken Asher's attention. It had been a royal ring for generations, and he had explained that when Asher used his power, its color changed. After a while, it returned to its original state, but it reminded her of the ring that glowed blue, immediately after using its power. The last time she had listened to it with no attention, but he had said that the color had changed when he had seen her ring. She had forgotten, but she remembered that he had also looked at her hand with strange eyes. No way. Because of the crazy idea, her face hardened. She also wondered that if she used the hourglass, the ring would shine like Asher's. No, it can't be. Last time, she had used the hourglass but not today. She only remembered taking a walk near the pond of the Imperial Castle. Nevertheless, she took out the hourglass she had left in the cabinet just in case, and even though she thought it was impossible, she wanted to check it. Celine, who had been weighing the time with her pocket watch for a moment, turned the hourglass slowly. She put the speeding hourglass on the table and lowered her trembling eyes to check the ring on her hand. The ring unbelievably emitted a blue light like when Asher had used his power. What the hell is this? Why? Why is the ring glowing? Was it because I used the hourglass? Was it because I'm using a power that was the same as Asher's even though I'm not a part of the royal family? The ring was glowing blue, and she thought that it was the only answer. Is that why he mentioned the color of the ring right after I used the hourglass? Did he know what was happening all along? When her thoughts reached that far, she lost her energy. There was a chance that Asher knew about her ability. She had thought she would have to say it someday, but she hadn't wanted Asher to notice it first. What should I do? Should I tell it to him? She was worried but got no answer. Most of all, she wondered if he knew it and if it might shine in another way. Furthermore, she was drowsy because she had used the hourglass. I'll ask him about the ring again. The question would not be answered if she grumbled alone, and as Asher had confessed his secret, the time for her to confess her secret was coming near. Brother, I think this birthday party should be big. Celine, who had ignored him, treating him like someone she didn't know, suddenly spoke to him, and Cain was stiff. She had talked through the servants when she had something to say, but what was the reason? What? He didn't understand what she was saying, and he asked again what she had just told him, and Celine added a little smile because he said it in a slightly dumb tone. I told you I'd have to make my birthday party a little bigger because not only my friends but also your acquaintances who live in the mansion would attend. In her words mentioning the soldiers, Cain, who understood what she meant, cleared his throat and pretended to be casual. That makes sense. It was funny that he could not refuse her request even though it was obvious that he was having problems with money. Can I tell the butler that? I will say that you gave me permission. Okay, do it. Celine had not given him a glance, and he seemed satisfied that she had acknowledged him as the head of Count Vermont family and that she asked his permission. Perhaps he thought it was worth it to push his father down the stairs and serve as the acting count even if he did not know that it was a ruined family. Cain didn't know, but the Countess had already taken almost all of the Count's family's money away, and that the Count's family had no money to spend on an expensive birthday party. No, the Count's family had no money to even hold a birthday party. The Count, who did not know that his family finances were in danger, had allowed the Countess, who had melted his heart, to use his property under the pretext of taking care of himself. Of course, she had only got his permission but had not reported to anyone. That was because she had used the property but had not stated that she had used it. So there's no record, so you're stupidly aware that the Count's family still has a lot of money left. All this was because Cain had not informed the Count that he was not doing his business properly, nor had he asked for advice. If the Count was in good shape, he might have known what was going on, but he was in a state of instability, and he could not make a proper judgment. There were many things that were happening, and those were eating up the family of Count Vermont, and it was in a very bad situation to fall straight down if someone touched it lightly with his fingers. Thank you, brother. Well, it's nothing, and it's an occasion that is only held once a year, so it's not bad to make the most splendid one in the entire empire. As soon as the words fell, Celine, who gave Cain a bright smile, immediately instructed the butler to make the party grander. Yes? Bigger than we originally planned? Yes, there are a lot of people in the house beside the guests I would invite. The butler looked worried, but as it was the instruction of the wise Celine, he said he would do so. I'll do my best not to disappoint you. He really did his best to prepare the party. Since it was winter, the garden was minimally decorated, but the mansion was fully decorated. Asher, who she had been expecting a visit in the meantime, did not appear and sent a letter to inform her of his regards. He must know my power, too.